Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Benjamin Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. Most of that time, I've worked the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, protecting places that mean something to people, sacred places where history still lives in the trees and stones. I'm part Cherokee myself, though I didn't grow up knowing much about that side of my family. My grandmother used to tell me stories, but I was young and stupid and thought they were just fairy tales. It wasn't until I started this job that I began to understand. Some stories aren't meant to entertain, they're meant to warn. The Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest is my beat. 12 miles from the visitor center, nothing but walking trails to get there. It's old-growth forest, trees that were already giants when Columbus was still lost at sea. The poplar trees there are over 400 years old, some of them 8 feet across. When you stand among them, you feel small. You feel watched. September 1969 was colder than usual. We'd had frost 3 mornings running, which shouldn't happen until October. The leaves were turning early, and the animals were acting strange. Deer wouldn't come near the old stone circles. Birds went quiet when you walked past certain spots. Even the insects seemed to avoid some areas. I'd been studying Cherokee language and culture for the past few years, trying to connect with that part of myself I'd lost growing up. The elders in the community had been patient with my questions, teaching me about the old ways. They'd also been clear about certain rules. Some places were sacred, some places were dangerous, and some places were both. The stone circles in the Joyce Kilmer Grove fell into that last category. I'd known about them since my second year on the job. 7 circles of standing stones, each about 20 feet across, scattered through the deepest part of the old forest. They weren't natural formations, too perfect, too deliberate, but they weren't recent either. Trees had grown around them, through them in some cases. Whatever made those circles was older than any written history of the area. The Cherokee elders I'd talked to got quiet when I mentioned them, real quiet. Joseph Walkingstick, an elder I'd become friendly with, had finally told me what he knew. The circles were none-eye sites, places where the immortal beings lived. But something had gone wrong there long ago. The spirits that once protected the area had become something else, something angry. Best to leave those stones alone, Joseph had said. Some doors shouldn't be opened. I'd always respected that advice. Until the archaeologists showed up. Dr. Martin Reeves from the University of Tennessee had all the right permits. His team wanted to study the stone formations, maybe do some careful excavation around the largest circle. It was all legal, all approved. But legal doesn't always mean smart. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Reeves's voice was tight with something that might have been fear or excitement. "Ranger Ironwood, we need you up here. Something unusual is happening with the stones." I loaded my pack and started the long hike in. The forest felt different that morning. Too quiet. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The temperature dropped as I climbed higher, and by the time I reached the grove, I could see my breath. The archaeological team had set up camp about 50 yards from the largest stone circle. 3 tents, equipment tables, a generator for their tools. It looked professional and temporary, exactly what it was supposed to be. But something was wrong. Dr. Reeves met me at the edge of their camp. He was a thin man in his 50s, usually calm and methodical. Today he looked like he hadn't slept. His graduate students, 2 young women and a man about my age, were clustered around a recording device, arguing in low voices. "What's the problem, Doc?" I asked. He led me toward the stone circle. "It's the acoustic properties. We set up recording equipment yesterday to document any natural resonance. You know, wind through the stones, that sort of thing." We stopped at the edge of the circle. 9 standing stones, each about 6 feet tall, arranged in a perfect pattern. The stones were local granite, weathered, smooth by centuries of rain and wind. Nothing unusual about them, except for the humming. It was soft, barely audible, but it was there. A low, musical tone that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Not wind, not insects. Something else. How long has it been doing that? I asked. Since about 3 this morning, one of the graduate students said. Sarah, I think her name was. It started right after the moon set. I knelt and put my hand on the nearest stone. The humming was definitely coming from inside it, a vibration I could feel in my bones. It reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. Any equipment damage? I asked. Dr. Reeves shook his head. That's the strange part. All our instruments are working fine. But listen to this. He led me back to their recording equipment and hit play on a small device. The humming came through the speakers, but underneath it was something else. Voices. Human voices, singing in a language that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Cherokee. They were singing in Cherokee. I recognized the song, though I wished I didn't. Joseph Walkingstick had taught it to me the previous winter, along with the warning that it should never be sung alone. It was a death song. A song for guiding spirits from this world to the next. You understand what they're saying? Dr. Reeves asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. It's Cherokee, a funeral song. But that's impossible, Sarah said. There's no one here but us. I looked around the campsite. The graduate students were staring at me like I might have answers. Dr. Reeves was checking and rechecking his equipment. Normal people doing normal work in a place that was anything but normal. I need to make a phone call, I said. There's someone who knows more about this place than I do. The nearest phone was back at the ranger station, 12 miles of hiking. I told Dr. Reeves to keep recording, but not to disturb the stones any further. Something in my voice must have convinced him, because he nodded without argument. The hike down felt longer than usual. The forest stayed too quiet, and I kept feeling like something was following me. Not animal sounds, I knew all those. This was different. Footsteps that matched mine exactly, stopping when I stopped, starting when I moved. When I looked back, there was never anything there. Joseph Walkingstick lived on the reservation, about 20 miles from the park. When I called him that afternoon, I could hear the worry in his voice as soon as I described what we'd found. Benjamin, he said, you need to get those people away from there. Tonight. What's happening, Joseph? What are those stones? There was a long pause. My grandfather told me stories about that place. During the removal, when our people were forced from their homes, some of the spirits that protected us became changed. Too much pain, too much anger. The stones were built to keep them contained. The removal. The Trail of Tears. I knew the history, how the Cherokee had been forced from their ancestral lands in the 1,832, thousands dying on the march to Oklahoma. But I'd never connected it to the stone circles. Contained how? Ceremony, sacred songs, offerings. But if the stones are singing death songs, Joseph's voice trailed off. That means something has weakened the binding. Those archaeologists need to leave. Now, I drove back to the trailhead faster than I should have, my mind racing. The sun was already setting by the time I started the hike back up. In the growing darkness, the forest felt alive in a way that wasn't natural. Shadows moved without wind, branches creaked without weight. I could hear the stones from a quarter-mile away. The humming had gotten louder, much louder. It echoed through the trees like a giant tuning fork, and underneath it, the Cherokee voices had multiplied. Instead of one singer, there were dozens. Men, women, children, all singing the same mournful song. When I reached the camp, I found chaos. Dr. Reeves was on his knees beside one of his graduate students, the young man David. David was sitting perfectly still, staring at the stone circle, his lips moving silently. Sarah and the other student, Lisa, were trying to get his attention, but he didn't respond. He didn't even blink. What happened? I shouted over the singing. He was taking measurements near the stones. Dr. Reeves called back. The singing got louder, and he just stopped. He's been like this for an hour. I knelt beside David. His eyes were open but unfocused, like he was seeing something very far away. When I listened closely, I could hear what he was whispering. Cherokee. He was speaking Cherokee, the same words as the singing stones. But David had never studied native languages. He was a geology major from Memphis. We need to get him away from here, I said. All of you, pack up now. But our equipment, Dr. Reeves started. Leave it. Something in my voice must have convinced them, because they started breaking camp without further argument. The only problem was David. He wouldn't move. When we tried to lift him, he became dead weight, still whispering in Cherokee, still staring at the stones. That's when I noticed the other sounds. Underneath the singing, there were footsteps. Lots of them, walking in rhythm around the stone circles. But when I looked, there was no one there. Just the sounds of feet on dry leaves, getting closer to our camp. The stones were glowing now, not bright, but visible in the darkness. A soft blue light that pulsed in time with the singing. And in that light, I began to see shapes moving between the stones. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that hurt to watch. "Dr. Reeves," I said quietly, "we need to leave, right now." He looked at the stone circle and saw what I was seeing. The shapes were becoming clearer, more solid. Cherokee warriors, but not as they had been in life. These figures bore wounds that never healed. Eyes that burned with grief turned to rage. David stood up suddenly. Not like a person getting up, but like he was being lifted. He turned toward the stones and started walking. "Stop him!" I shouted. We grabbed David's arms, but he was impossibly strong. He dragged us forward, step by step, toward the glowing stones. Toward the waiting figures that were becoming more real every moment. The Cherokee voices rose to a howl. I did the only thing I could think of. I started singing. Not the death song that was echoing from the stones, but something Joseph had taught me. A protection song. A prayer for travelers in dangerous places. My Cherokee wasn't perfect, but it was heartfelt, and it was the right intention. The effect was immediate. David collapsed like his strings had been cut. The glowing in the stones dimmed. The singing didn't stop, but it pulled back, like something considering its options. "Get him up," I told Dr. Reeves. "We leave now." We half-carried David between us, Sarah and Lisa grabbing what supplies they could. Behind us, the stone circle erupted in angry light. The Cherokee voices became screams of rage, and the footsteps I'd been hearing broke into a run. I didn't look back. Looking back would have been a mistake. We made it maybe half a mile before David came around. He blinked, looked around at the dark forest, and asked what was happening. He didn't remember anything after setting up his equipment near the stones. "Gas leak," Dr. Reeves lied smoothly. "Probably from an underground source. Made you hallucinate." It was a good lie. Better than the truth. David accepted it, and we kept moving. But I could still hear the singing behind us, following at a distance. Whatever lived in those stones wasn't done with us. We reached the ranger station just after midnight. I got the archaeologist settled in the bunkhouse and called Joseph again. "It's worse than you thought," I told him. "The spirits manifested, physically. I saw them." "Then the binding is broken," Joseph said grimly. "Benjamin, those spirits aren't just angry. They're in pain. Centuries of it. The removal, the broken promises, the children who died on the trail. All of that lives in them now. They don't remember how to forgive. How do we stop them? How do we stop them? I don't know if we can, but I know someone who might. My great-uncle, Walking Bear. He's old, older than anyone has a right to be. He knew the people who built those stones." Joseph arranged to meet me the next morning. Dr. Reeves and his team were eager to leave, filing their reports and packing their equipment. David seemed fine, with no memory of his possession. I didn't tell them what had really happened. Some truths are too dangerous to share. But as they were loading their van, Lisa came up to me privately. "Ranger Ironwood," she said quietly. "That wasn't a gas leak, was it?" I studied her face. She was young, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes and the kind of practical demeanor that comes from growing up on a farm. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been studying acoustics for 3 years, and I know the difference between natural resonance and something else. Those stones were singing, really singing. And David." She shook her head. "David doesn't speak any language but English and a little Spanish. But last night he was fluent in whatever that was. I made a decision that probably wasn't smart. Cherokee. He was speaking Cherokee." Lisa nodded like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. "There are stories about this place, aren't there? Old stories." "Yes. Bad stories. Bad stories. Very bad." She was quiet for a moment then. "If you need help, I'll stay. I'm not afraid of old stories." I almost said yes. Having someone with her technical knowledge might have been useful. But I'd seen what those spirits could do to outsiders. and I wasn't willing to risk another person. Go home, Lisa. Write your report. Forget about this place. She didn't argue, but I could see in her eyes that forgetting wasn't going to be possible. Joseph arrived an hour later with Walking Bear. The old man was ancient, his face like weathered leather, his hair white as snow, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who'd lived through things most people couldn't imagine. Walking Bear listened to my story without interruption, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. The Nunahi were our protectors once, he finally said, immortal beings who watched over the Cherokee people. But during the removal, when the soldiers came with their guns and their chains, some of the Nunahi tried to fight. They were bound to this place, you see. They couldn't follow our people west. He stared toward the mountains where the Joyce-Kilmer Grove waited. So they stayed, and they watched our children die. They watched our elders collapse on the trail. They felt every death, every injustice, every broken promise. And slowly, that pain changed them, made them into something else. The stone circles were built to contain them? Walking Bear nodded. By the last Cherokee shamans before the removal. They knew what their protectors had become. The stones were a prison, but also a mercy. Better to be contained than to become monsters. But something broke the binding. 8. Time, Walking Bear said simply. Time and neglect. The songs that maintained the binding haven't been sung in over a century. The offerings haven't been made. The spirits inside have been growing stronger and madder every year. Joseph spoke up. Can the binding be renewed? Walking Bear looked at him with sad eyes. Perhaps. But it would require the old ceremonies, the old songs, and someone willing to take the risk. What risk? The spirits don't just hate outsiders now, Walking Bear explained. They hate everyone, including us. They blame all the living for the deaths of the dead. To renew the binding, someone would have to enter the stone circle during the full moon and offer themselves as a conduit for the spirit's pain. They would have to experience every death on the trail of tears, feel every injustice, carry every grief. He looked directly at me. It would probably kill them. I thought about David, standing in that stone circle with empty eyes. I thought about the shapes moving between the stones, warriors trapped in endless grief and rage. I thought about other archaeologists, other researchers who might come to study the site. When's the next full moon? I asked. Tomorrow night, Joseph said quietly. That gave me less than 24 hours to prepare. Walking Bear spent the rest of the day teaching me the old songs, the proper words, the exact ceremonies. My Cherokee was rough, but he said intention mattered more than perfection. The spirits will know if your heart is true, he said. That's what matters. As the sun set, we hiked back up to the grove. The stones were already humming, preparing for the full moon. But tonight, the sound was different, hungrier. Tonight, they knew we were coming. The full moon rose over the Joyce-Kilmer Grove like a spotlight on a stage. In its light, the stone circle looked different, older, more deliberate, more dangerous. The humming had grown so loud it vibrated in my chest, and the Cherokee death songs echoed through the forest like a choir of the damned. Walking Bear and Joseph stayed at the tree line. This part I had to do alone. Remember, Walking Bear called to me. Don't fight the visions. Let them flow through you. The spirits need to know their pain is acknowledged. I nodded and stepped into the circle. The moment my foot crossed the line of stones, the world changed. The forest disappeared. In its place was a dirt road stretching westward, crowded with people. Cherokee families carrying everything they owned, children crying, elders struggling to keep up. Soldiers on horseback rode alongside them, rifles ready, faces hard as stone. I was seeing the trail of tears. But I wasn't just seeing it, I was feeling it. The hunger that gnawed at empty bellies, the cold that bit through thin clothes, the desperation of mothers watching their children weaken, the rage of fathers unable to protect their families. The spirits in the stones had been forced to watch this. All of it, every step, every death, every moment of suffering. And they'd been powerless to help. Asterisk, now you see, asterisk, a voice said in my mind. Asterisk, now you understand our pain. Asterisk. The spirit that spoke wasn't visible, but I could feel its presence. Ancient, powerful, and filled with a grief so deep it had curdled into hate. Asterisk. We were guardians once, Asterisk, another voice added. Asterisk. We protected the people, guided them, blessed them, but when they needed us most, we could only watch them die. Asterisk. More voices joined in, a chorus of the betrayed and abandoned. They showed me more visions, children falling by the roadside, elders giving up their food so the young might live, warriors dying of disease in federal camps. Through it all, the Nunahi spirits watched, bound to their sacred places, helpless. Asterisk, why should we contain ourselves now? Asterisk, the first voice demanded. Asterisk, why should we show mercy to a world that showed none to our people? Asterisk, the visions shifted. Now I saw the spirits as they had become, no longer protectors but avengers. They showed me what they planned to do. Every person who disturbed their sacred sites would be possessed, turned into vessels for their rage. Through these human puppets, they would spread across the land, bringing the pain of the Trail of Tears to everyone who had forgotten or ignored it. Asterisk, you understand now, asterisk, the voice said with satisfaction. Asterisk, you feel our justice. Asterisk, and I did feel it. The pain was so overwhelming, I fell to my knees. But as the visions continued, I began to see something else, something the spirits, in their rage, had forgotten. I saw the survivors. Cherokee, who made it to Oklahoma and rebuilt their lives. Children, who grew up to become leaders, artists, teachers. Families that endured and prospered despite everything that had been done to them. I saw my own grandmother, telling me stories by firelight, teaching me that loss and pain didn't have to define us, that we could honor the dead without becoming consumed by their suffering. Asterisk. The people survived? Asterisk, I said aloud, my voice carrying across the circle. Asterisk. They lived. They rebuilt. They remembered. Asterisk. The spirit's rage faltered. Asterisk. What do you know of survival? You live in comfort while they suffered. Asterisk. Asterisk. I know that honoring the dead means living for something more than revenge. Asterisk, I said, getting back to my feet. Asterisk. I know that my grandmother would weep to see what you've become. Asterisk. I began to sing the protection song Joseph had taught me, but I changed the words. Instead of asking for protection from the spirits, I sang about protecting them. Protecting them from their own pain, offering them rest instead of endless anger. The response was immediate and violent. The spirits manifested fully, appearing as Cherokee warriors but wrong, distorted by rage and pain. They surrounded me in the circle, their eyes burning with blue fire, their wounds still fresh after more than a century. Asterisk, you dare tell us to rest? Asterisk, they screamed. Asterisk, you dare speak of peace while our children's bones bleach in unmarked graves? Asterisk, they reached for me with hands like ice and shadow. Where they touched, I felt their pain directly. Every injustice, every loss, every moment of helpless watching, it should have driven me insane. Instead, I embraced it. Asterisk, I don't tell you to forget. Asterisk, I said, my voice steady despite the agony coursing through me. Asterisk, I tell you to transform. Take this pain and make it into something that honors those who died. Become guardians again, not destroyers. Asterisk. Asterisk, how? Asterisk, one of them demanded. Asterisk, how do we guard a world that hates us? Asterisk. Asterisk, by protecting the sacred places, by ensuring the stories are remembered, by being teachers instead of killers. Asterisk. I was burning from the inside out, their collected pain threatening to tear me apart. But I held on to the vision of my grandmother, of the strength she'd shown in the face of loss, of the choice she'd made to build something beautiful instead of something destructive. Asterisk, the stone circles don't have to be prisons. Asterisk, I said. Asterisk, they can be classrooms. Places where people learn the truth of what happened here. Where the dead are honored properly. Asterisk. For a moment, the spirits wavered. I could feel them considering my words, remembering what they had been before pain changed them. Then the strongest of them, the one who had spoken first, stepped forward. Asterisk, you would take our pain into yourself? Asterisk, it asked. Asterisk, all of it? Every death, every loss, every moment of suffering? Asterisk, I knew what it was asking. The binding that contained them needed an anchor, someone willing to carry the weight of their grief. someone who could feel it without being destroyed by it. Yes, I said. The spirit reached out and touched my forehead. The world exploded into pain. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Knoxville. Joseph was sitting beside my bed, his face drawn with worry. "How do you feel?" he asked. I took inventory. My body ached like I'd been hit by a truck, but I was alive. More importantly, I was still sane. The memories of the Trail of Tears were still with me, but they felt different now. Not like foreign pain forced into my mind, but like stories I'd been entrusted to carry. "What happened after I passed out?" "The spirits accepted your offer," Joseph said. "The binding is renewed, but different than before. Instead of a prison, the stone circles are now monuments, I suppose. Sacred places where the dead are honored instead of trapped. And the spirits? At peace, as far as we can tell. Walking Bear says they'll remain in the stones, but as guardians again, not prisoners. They'll protect the sacred sites and teach those who come seeking knowledge with proper respect." I sat up slowly, my head spinning. "What about the official reports?" "Dr. Reeves filed a recommendation that the stone circles be designated as culturally sensitive areas, off-limits to archaeological study. The university agreed. The site will remain protected. That was something, at least. But I knew this was bigger than just one grove of stones. Over the following weeks, as I recovered and returned to work, I began hearing reports from other rangers across the southeast. Stone circles in North Carolina were humming at night. Burial mounds in Georgia were glowing during thunderstorms. Sacred sites throughout Cherokee territory were becoming active. The spirits in the Joyce Kilmer Grove hadn't been the only ones changed by historical trauma. There were others, in other places, carrying their own pain and rage. And now that one group had found peace, the others were stirring. I started reaching out to tribal elders across the region, sharing what I'd learned. Some were skeptical, but others had their own stories about sacred sites becoming dangerous. Together, we began developing protocols for approaching these places with proper respect and ceremony. Lisa, the graduate student from Dr. Reeves' team, contacted me a month later. She'd been researching Cherokee sacred sites across the southeast and had compiled a list of over 40 locations with similar stone formations. All of them had reports of unusual acoustic phenomena. All of them were connected to Trail of Tears routes. "I want to help," she said when she visited the ranger station. "I want to learn the proper way to study these places." I introduced her to Joseph and Walking Bear. If she was serious about this work, she needed to understand the cultural context, not just the technical aspects. She proved to be a dedicated student, learning Cherokee history and language with the same intensity she'd once applied to acoustics. 6 months later, we formed an official partnership between the National Park Service and the Cherokee Nation. Our job was to identify and protect sacred sites that might be affected by historical trauma, and to develop proper protocols for studying them without causing harm. It wasn't easy work. Some spirits were more willing to communicate than others. Some required complex ceremonies that took weeks to complete, and some were so consumed by rage that they couldn't be reasoned with at all. But we made progress. Site by site, circle by circle, we began the long work of healing places that had been wounded by history. The stone circles in Joyce Kilmer still sing, but their songs have changed. Instead of death chants, they now sing welcome songs for visitors who approach with respect. Instead of trapping spirits in endless grief, they serve as bridges between the living and the dead. I still hear the voices sometimes, especially during the full moon. But they're different now. Peaceful, grateful. They tell me stories about the old days, teach me songs I would never have learned otherwise, and remind me of truths that textbooks can't capture. Walking Bear passed away last winter, but not before teaching me the deepest ceremonies, the ones that can heal spiritual wounds that have festered for generations. He told me the work would take more than my lifetime to complete, but that it was worth doing anyway. "Every sacred site we heal," he said, "makes the world a little more balanced, a little more whole." Sometimes tourists ask me about the stone circles when they're planning hikes in the Joyce Kilmer Grove. I tell them they're ancient Cherokee sacred sites that should be approached with respect. I don't mention the spirits, or the ceremonies, or the visions. Most people aren't ready for that truth. But I always end with the same warning Walking Bear gave me years ago. Some places are sacred for good reason. Respect the barriers, honor the dead, and remember that every place has a story. Some of those stories are still being told. The work continues. There are more sites to heal, more spirits to counsel, more bridges to build between past and present. It's not the kind of park ranger job I thought I was signing up for 11 years ago, but it's the one I was meant to do. In the deep places of the forest, where ancient trees stand guard over older secrets, the stones still sing. But now their songs are prayers instead of curses, welcome instead of warning, healing instead of harm. The dead have found their peace. Now it's up to the living to keep it. My name is William Darkwater, and I've been a forest ranger for 16 years. I spent most of that time in Jefferson National Forest, watching over the Clinch Mountain area in Virginia. My job isn't what most folks think it is. Sure, I help lost hikers and put out campfires, but mostly I deal with something much worse: the scars left behind by coal mining. I grew up in a mining family. My dad worked the tunnels until black lung took him when I was 12. That's why I got my environmental engineering degree, to understand what these mines do to our land and water. For the past 8 years, I've been the guy they send to check on abandoned mines, test the water, and make sure nobody gets hurt exploring places they shouldn't be. I thought the only real dangers were cave-ins and bad air. I was wrong. It was November 1978, and freezing rain had been falling for 3 days straight. The kind of weather that turns dirt roads into rivers and makes even the main highways dangerous. I was sitting in my ranger station when Sheriff Coleman called about some missing kids. "Will, we got 5 college boys who went up to Black Damp Hollow 3 days ago," he said. "Their car's still there, but no sign of them. Parents are going crazy." I knew Black Damp Hollow. Everyone around here did. It was an old coal mine complex up at 2,200 feet, abandoned since a terrible explosion in 1949 that killed 67 miners. The whole area was a mess of strip mines and acid drainage that killed every creek for miles. The access road had been condemned for years. What were they doing up there? I asked, though I already knew. College kids loved exploring abandoned places, especially ones with scary stories. "Same thing they always do," Coleman said, "looking for ghosts and taking pictures." But this time they didn't come back. I grabbed my gear, gas detector, hard hat, rope, first aid kit, and enough food for 2 days. The drive up to Black Damp Hollow took me 3 hours because of the rain. The old mining road was barely passable, full of potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. When I got there, the kid's car was right where Coleman said it would be, covered in mud and rain. I found their tracks leading toward the main mine entrance, but something was off. The mine had been sealed with concrete back in 1950. Nobody was supposed to get in. The concrete was cracked open like an egg. I pulled out my flashlight and looked closer. The break wasn't from outside pressure, rocks or weather wearing it down. The concrete was pushed outward, like something had broken through from inside the mine. That should have been impossible. The mine had been sealed for 30 years. I called Sheriff Coleman on my radio. "I found where they went in. The seal's been broken. Can you follow them?" I looked into the black hole that led into the mountain. My gas detector was already beeping. There was methane in there, but not at dangerous levels yet. The smart thing would be to wait for a proper rescue team with better equipment. But those kids had been missing for 3 days. If they were hurt or trapped, every hour mattered. "I'm going in," I said. "If you don't hear from me in 12 hours, send help." The mine entrance was bigger than I expected. The ceiling was high enough that I couldn't see it with my flashlight, and the tunnel stretched into darkness. Water dripped everywhere, and the air smelled like rotten eggs from the sulfur in the rock. I'd been in dozens of abandoned mines before. They all felt dead, empty spaces where nothing lived anymore. But this one felt different. It felt like it was watching me. My boots echoed in the tunnel as I walked deeper. The kids' footprints were still visible in the mud, along with their trash, candy bar wrappers, and empty soda cans. At least I was going the right way. After about 100 yards, I found something that made me stop cold. There were other footprints in the mud, but these weren't from sneakers or hiking boots. They were from old-fashioned work boots, the kind miners wore decades ago, and they were fresh. Someone else was in these mines, someone who dressed like it was still 1949. I checked my gas detector again. The readings were weird, the methane levels kept jumping up and down like the air itself couldn't make up its mind. That shouldn't happen. Gas pockets don't move around like that. I kept following the tunnel deeper into the mountain. The walls were covered in white mineral deposits from the acid water, and every sound echoed like I was inside a huge church. After another 100 yards, I found more of the kids' stuff, a backpack and a broken camera. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound I'd never heard before, but somehow knew immediately. The low, mournful wail of a mine whistle, the kind they used to blow at shift change, calling workers in and out of the tunnels. But there hadn't been a working mine here for 30 years. The sound came from deeper in the mine, and it made my skin crawl. I checked my watch, 3:33 a.m. Who blows a whistle at 3:33 inches the morning? I should have left right then. Should have gone back to my truck, called for a real search team, and waited for daylight. But those missing kids were somewhere in this mountain, and the whistle sounded like it came from the same direction as their tracks. I kept walking into the darkness, not knowing that some shifts never end, and some workers never clock out. The tunnel split into 3 different paths, about a quarter-mile in. I stopped to study the ground, trying to figure out which way the kids had gone. Their footprints were getting harder to see on the rocky floor, but I could still make out sneaker treads going down the middle tunnel. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Those old-fashioned work boot prints were following the same path. Not just following Blooded Buddy, they were on top of the kids' prints. Fresh boot prints over 3-day-old sneaker tracks. Someone had walked this exact route after the kids came through. I pulled out my radio to call Sheriff Coleman, but got nothing but static. The rock was too thick to get a signal out. I was on my own until I got back to the surface. The middle tunnel sloped downward, and the air got thicker as I went deeper. My gas detector started beeping more often. Not dangerous yet, but getting close. The walls here were different too. Instead of natural rock, they were held up by old wooden beams that creaked when the mountain settled. Some of those beams had dates carved into them: 1947, 1948, 1949. The last year the mine was active. I found the first college kid about 50 yards down. His name was Tommy Morrison, according to the wallet in his back pocket. He was sitting against the tunnel wall like he'd just decided to take a break. No visible injuries, no blood. He looked peaceful, like he was sleeping. But he was cold as the stone around him, and he'd been dead for days. I checked for a pulse anyway, knowing I wouldn't find one. His skin was gray, and when I moved his arm, it was stiff with rigor mortis. But here's what I couldn't understand. There wasn't a mark on him. No cuts, no bruises, no sign of a struggle or fall. It was like he'd just sat down and died. I was checking his body more carefully when I heard footsteps. Heavy work boots on stone, coming from somewhere deeper in the mine. Slow, steady steps like someone walking to work. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Ranger Darkwater. Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. I listened for a full minute, but heard nothing except my own breathing and the drip of water. Then the footsteps started again, but this time they were moving away from me, going deeper into the mine. I had to make a choice. Follow the footsteps and maybe find who'd been walking these tunnels. Or go back and report what I'd found. The smart thing was to leave, bring back help, and do this right. But there were still 4 missing kids somewhere in this mountain. I marked Tommy's location with my spray paint, a bright orange X on the wall, and kept going. The tunnel got narrower as it went down, and the wooden support beams got older and more rotten. Some of them were held up by sheer luck and the weight of the mountain above. That's when I started hearing the other sounds. At first, I thought it was just the mountain settling. Old mines make all kinds of noise as the rock shifts and the wood creaks. But these sounds had a rhythm to them. The clink of metal on stone, like someone swinging a pickaxe. The scrape of shovels loading coal. The rattle of mine cars rolling on tracks. But there were no tracks in this tunnel. Haven't been for 30 years. I stopped and listened carefully. The sounds were coming from all around me, above, below, from side tunnels I couldn't see. Like the whole mountain was full of people working, even though that was impossible. My gas detector started going crazy. The methane readings were jumping all over the place. Dangerous levels 1 second, safe the next. That kind of fluctuation should have been impossible. Gas doesn't behave like that. I found the second body at the intersection with another tunnel. This one was Sarah Chen, a photography student from Virginia Tech. She was lying on her side, her expensive camera still hanging around her neck. Like Tommy, she had no visible injuries, no sign of what killed her. But her camera was different. The lens was pointing into one of the side tunnels, and the flash had been fired recently. I could smell the sharp scent of burned magnesium in the air. She'd taken a picture of something right before she died. I tried to rewind the film, but the camera was jammed. Whatever she'd photographed, I wasn't going to see it without better tools. The footsteps started again while I was examining Sarah's body. This time they were closer, and I could hear more than one set. Heavy boots, moving in formation like a work crew heading to their shift. I followed the sound into the side tunnel where Sarah's camera had been pointing. This tunnel was older than the others, with rougher walls and lower ceiling. I had to duck in places to keep from hitting my head. But the strangest thing was the air. It was warmer here, and it smelled like coal dust and machine oil. Smells that should have faded away decades ago. The tunnel opened into a large chamber carved out of the rock. My flashlight couldn't reach the far walls, but I could see rusty equipment scattered around, pickaxes, shovels, and what looked like an old minecart full of coal. Fresh coal. Still black and shiny, not covered in the white mineral deposits that coated everything else in the mine. I walked over to the minecart and touched the coal. It crumbled in my fingers like it had just been dug out of the rock, but that was impossible. This mine had been abandoned for 30 years. That's when I saw him. A man in old-fashioned work clothes was standing on the other side of the chamber. Overalls, heavy boots, and a dented hard hat with a carbide lamp attached to the front. He was loading coal into another cart, working steadily like he had all day to finish the job. I called out to him, but he didn't look up. Just kept working, his shovel scraping against the rock with each load. I walked closer, my flashlight beam getting stronger as I approached. The man was pale, almost gray, and there was something wrong with the left side of his face. It looked crushed, like he'd been hit by falling rock. "Sir? Are you okay?" "I'm a ranger. I'm here to help." He looked up at me then, and I saw his eyes. They were black holes in his face, deeper than any mine shaft. When he smiled, I could see that most of his teeth were missing. "Shift ain't over," he said in a voice like gravel rolling down a hill. "Still got coal to load." I took a step back, my hand moving to the radio that I knew wouldn't work. This man should have been in a hospital, not loading coal in an abandoned mine. His injuries looked fatal. "How long have you been down here?" I asked. "Since the whistle blew," he said. "Always work till the whistle blows." He went back to loading coal, like our conversation was over. I watched him for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. His movements were too smooth, too regular, like a machine that never got tired. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight on him until I reached the tunnel entrance. Then I turned and ran back to the main passage, my heart pounding and my breath coming in short gasps. I had to find the other 3 kids and get out of this place. Whatever was happening in these mines, it wasn't natural. And I was starting to think those college kids hadn't just gotten lost. They'd found something that didn't want to be found. I made it back to the main tunnel, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight steady. What I'd seen in that chamber didn't make sense. A man with fatal injuries, loading fresh coal in a mine that had been dead for 30 years. But I couldn't think about that now. 3 kids were still missing, and I had a job to do. I kept following the tunnel deeper, looking for more orange paint marks or dropped belongings. The sounds of mining work were getting louder, pickaxes, shovels, the rumble of mine cars. Sometimes I heard voices too, men calling to each other in the darkness. But every time I tried to follow the sounds, they seemed to move away from me. My gas detector was acting stranger by the minute. The readings kept spiking into dangerous territory, then dropping back to normal. That kind of fluctuation could mean pockets of gas moving around, but I'd never seen anything like it. I found the 3rd body in a side chamber about 100 yards down. Marcus Webb, age 20. He was sitting at what looked like an old wooden table, his head resting on his arms like he'd fallen asleep reading. There was a book open in front of him, some kind of local history about the mines. But just like the others, there wasn't a mark on him. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Marcus was still warm, not body temperature, but not cold like Tommy and Sarah had been, like he'd died recently, very recently. I checked my watch. I'd been in the mine for 3 hours. If Marcus had just died, that meant something had killed him while I was down here. Something I might run into next. I was about to leave when I saw the notebook beside his book. Marcus had been taking notes, writing down everything he'd learned about the mine. I flipped through the pages, looking for anything that might help me understand what was happening. Most of it was just historical facts. The mine opened in 1923, employed over 300 men at its peak, produced anthracite coal for steel mills. But the last entry was different. Shift whistle blows every night at 3:33 a.m. Workers report for duty even though they died in the explosion. Mine superintendent says they can't clock out until the safety inspection is complete. Been waiting 30 years for someone to finish the job. I looked at my watch again. 4:15 a.m. I'd heard the whistle at 3:33, just like Marcus had written. But that was impossible. Shift whistles don't blow themselves. I was reading more of his notes when I heard a new sound. Footsteps again, but these were different, faster, more urgent. And they were coming toward me. I grabbed Marcus's notebook and stuffed it in my jacket, then got ready to move. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could hear breathing, raspy, labored breathing like someone with damaged lungs. A man appeared at the chamber entrance. He was wearing the same kind of work clothes as the coal loader, but his overalls were torn and blackened. His face was covered in coal dust, and there was blood on his hands. "You, the safety inspector?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. This man looked like he'd been in an explosion, but he was standing and talking like nothing was wrong. "I'm a ranger," I said carefully. "I'm looking for some missing people." "Safety inspector's supposed to come check the tunnels," he said, ignoring my answer. "Been waiting since 49. Can't finish the shift without the safety check." He took a step into the chamber, and I could see more of his injuries. There was a piece of metal sticking out of his chest, and one of his arms hung at an unnatural angle. But he didn't seem to notice. "Dangerous down here," he continued. "Gas pockets, weak timbers, water seepage. Need the inspector to sign off before we can clock out." I was backing toward the other exit when more men appeared. 5 or 6 of them, all in mining clothes, all with terrible injuries that should have killed them. They moved like they were sleepwalking, but their eyes were focused on me. "You got the safety equipment?" one of them asked. "Clipboard and forms?" I looked at my gear. Gas detector, rope, first aid kit. Not exactly safety inspection equipment, but maybe close enough. "I need to check the whole mine," I said, hoping I sounded official. "Can't sign off on anything until I've seen all the tunnels." They looked at each other, like they were having a conversation I couldn't hear. "Foreman's down in Section C," one of them finally said. "He's got the paperwork you need." "Where's Section C?" "Follow the main tunnel to the bottom. Can't miss it. Biggest chamber in the mine." They stepped aside to let me pass, but I could feel their eyes on me as I left the chamber. Whatever these men were, they wanted something from me. And I had a feeling that if I couldn't give it to them, I'd end up like Marcus, dead at a table with no injuries to explain it. The main tunnel kept going down, deeper into the mountain. The air was getting thicker, and my gas detector was beeping almost constantly now. I should have turned back, called for help, done this the right way. But I kept thinking about those kids, and about the men I'd seen. If they really were the miners who died in 1949, then they'd been trapped down here for 30 years. Maybe finishing this safety inspection was the key to helping everyone. I found the 4th body at the entrance to Section C. Jennifer Walsh, age 19. She was lying on her back, staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. But unlike the others, she was holding something in her hand, a piece of paper with writing on it. I pried her fingers open and read what she'd written. "They think I'm the safety inspector, playing along until I can find David. They keep talking about finishing the shift. Something about a gas explosion that was preventable. They're angry about safety violations that killed them. David must be the 5th student." I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, then looked into Section C. It was huge, a chamber carved out of solid rock, big enough to park a dozen trucks. Old equipment was scattered everywhere, mine cars, conveyor belts, drilling machines, and all of it looked like it was still in use. Men were working throughout the chamber, dozens of them, loading coal, checking equipment, measuring gas levels with instruments from the 1000 940 seconds. All of them had fatal injuries. All of them ignored me as I walked through. At the far end of the chamber, I found what I was looking for, a man in a supervisor's outfit, sitting at a desk made from rough planks. He had a clipboard and was making marks on sheets of paper. And sitting beside his desk, very much alive, was the fifth student, David Park, age 21. He was pale and shaky, but breathing. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. "Thank God," he whispered. "I thought no one would find me." I walked over to him carefully, keeping an eye on the supervisor. The man looked up from his paperwork and studied me with eyes like black coal. "You the replacement inspector?" he asked. "That's right," I said. "I need to take my assistant here and check the rest of the mine." "Can't do that," the supervisor said. "Inspection's almost done. Been working on it for 30 years. Just need someone to sign the final report." He handed me the clipboard. The paperwork was yellowed with age, but the writing was clear. It was a safety inspection report dated the 15th of October 1949, the day before the explosion. According to the report, the mine was full of safety violations, inadequate ventilation, dangerous gas levels, faulty equipment. The kind of problems that could cause a massive explosion if they weren't fixed. "Sign it," the supervisor said. "Make it official. Then we can clock out and go home." I looked around the chamber. All the workers had stopped what they were doing and were watching me, waiting for me to sign a piece of paper that might have saved their lives if someone had paid attention 30 years ago. But if I signed it, what would happen to David? To me? Would we become part of their eternal shift, trapped in this mountain forever? I had to make a choice, and I had about 30 seconds to make it, because the miners were starting to move closer, their black eyes fixed on the clipboard in my hands. I looked at the clipboard again, reading through the safety violations more carefully. Gas buildup in Section B. Rotted support timbers in the main shaft. Faulty ventilation that couldn't clear dangerous fumes. Every single problem that had caused the 1,949 explosion was documented right there. "This inspection was completed before the explosion," I said to the supervisor. "Why didn't anyone act on it?" His face darkened with an anger that had been burning for 30 years. "Company man said it would cost too much to fix," he said. "Told us to keep working anyway. Said miners were cheaper to replace than equipment." I understood now. These men had died because someone chose profit over safety. They'd been trying to complete their inspection for 30 years, waiting for someone with authority to make it official. "If I sign this, what happens?" "Justice," he said. "Company pays for what they done. Families get compensation, and we get to rest." It sounded reasonable, but I could see the trap. If I signed that paper, I'd become part of their world, part of the mine that never closed, the shift that never ended. David was looking at me with desperate eyes. He knew what I was thinking. "Don't do it," he whispered. "I've been here for 2 days. Every time someone tries to leave, they end up like the others. Dead, with no explanation." The supervisor stood up from his desk, and I could see his injuries clearly now. Half his chest was caved in from falling rock, and one leg was bent at an impossible angle. But he moved like those injuries didn't matter. "Sign the paper," he said again. Time to finish the job. All around the chamber, the workers were moving closer. I counted at least 40 of them, all with the same black eyes and terrible wounds, all waiting for me to complete the inspection that might have saved their lives. But there was something else in Marcus's notebook that I remembered. Something about the mine superintendent saying they couldn't clock out until the safety inspection was complete. "What if I could get the inspection done properly?" I asked. "With modern equipment, official documentation, everything the way it should be?" The supervisor paused. "You'd do that?" "I'm an environmental engineer," I said. "Checking mine safety is part of my job. But I need to do it right. With proper equipment, official forms, the works. That means going back to the surface." "No one leaves," one of the workers called out. "Not until the job's done." "But the job can't be done properly down here," I argued. "I need gas spectrometers, structural analysis equipment, official state forms. You want this inspection to mean something? It has to be done right." The miners looked at each other, having another one of those silent conversations. I could feel the tension in the air, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Finally, the supervisor nodded. "You come back." You do the inspection proper. Then we can rest. I'll come back, I promised, but I need to bring David with me. He's my assistant. The boy stays, the supervisor said. Insurance that you'll keep your word. That's when I knew I had to try something desperate. I pulled out my gas detector and held it up so they could all see it. This shows dangerous gas levels throughout the mine, I said. According to federal safety regulations, everyone needs to evacuate immediately. The beeping was getting faster as the methane levels climbed. We were approaching the kind of concentration that could explode with just a spark. You're all in immediate danger, I continued. My authority as a federal safety inspector requires me to order an emergency evacuation. I was stretching the truth. I wasn't a safety inspector, just a ranger with environmental training. But sometimes you have to use the authority people think you have. The supervisor looked confused. Evacuate? Everyone out, right now. That's a direct order from the U.S. Forest Service. The gas levels were climbing higher. My detector was screaming now, warning of an explosive atmosphere. And I realized something terrifying. The miners themselves were generating the gas somehow. Their presence was creating the same conditions that had killed them in 1949. Move, I shouted, grabbing David's arm. Everyone out. I started running toward the tunnel entrance, pulling David with me. Behind us, I could hear the miners beginning to move. Not following us, heading for other exits, like they were actually obeying the evacuation order. We made it to the main tunnel, but the gas levels were still climbing. My detector was giving off one continuous scream. The whole mine was becoming a bomb, and we were right in the middle of it. How far to the surface? David gasped. 1/2 mile, I said, maybe more. We ran through the darkness, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as we climbed toward the entrance. Behind us, I could hear the mountain groaning as gas pressure built up in the sealed chambers. We were halfway to the surface when the explosion hit. The blast wave knocked us flat, and dust filled the tunnel like a brown fog. Rock fell from the ceiling, and for a moment I thought the whole mountain was coming down. But the main tunnel held, and when the dust cleared, we were still alive. I helped David to his feet, and we kept climbing. My ears were ringing from the explosion, but I could hear something else. Silence. The mine sounds had stopped. No more pickaxes. No more footsteps. No more voices calling in the darkness. We reached the entrance just as the sun was coming up. David collapsed beside their car, breathing hard but safe. I called Sheriff Coleman on my radio to report what we'd found. 5 college students, I said. 4 dead, 1 survivor. Bodies are still in the mine, but the main tunnel's blocked now. We'll need heavy equipment to get them out. What I didn't tell him was that the 4 dead students looked peaceful when I last saw them. Like they were finally sleeping, instead of sitting at attention waiting for something that would never come. And I didn't tell him about the miners I'd seen, or the safety inspection I'd promised to complete. Some stories are too strange for official reports, but I kept that promise. Over the next 6 months, I documented every safety violation in Black Damp Hollow and filed official reports with 3 different government agencies. I made sure the families of the 1,949 explosion victims got recognition and compensation that was 60 years overdue. And I made sure the mine stayed sealed forever. The official report said 4 college students died from gas exposure in an abandoned mine. Carbon monoxide poisoning, probably from their camping stove in a confined space. Their bodies were recovered 3 weeks later when the tunnel was cleared. David never talked about what he saw down there. Post-traumatic stress, the doctors said. He changed his major from geology to accounting and moved to a city where the tallest thing around was office buildings. I went back to my regular ranger duties, but I couldn't shake what had happened. I started researching other mining accidents throughout Appalachia, looking for patterns. What I found kept me awake at night. There are abandoned mines all through these mountains, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And in almost every case, the companies that owned them cut corners on safety, ignored violations, and put profits ahead of human lives. Workers died in explosions that could have been prevented. They died in cave-ins from rotted timbers that should have been replaced. They died from gas that should have been ventilated, water that should have been pumped out, equipment that should have been maintained. And according to the stories locals tell, many of those mines still aren't quiet. I get calls every few months from other rangers, asking me to check out strange reports from abandoned mine sites. sounds of equipment running, work lights shining in sealed tunnels, men in old-fashioned mining clothes walking roads that haven't existed for decades. I always go. It's part of my job now, not the official job, but the real one, making sure the inspections get done right, making sure the safety violations get documented and reported, even if it's 30 or 50 or 70 years too late. Because some workers never clock out. They stay on the job until someone with authority acknowledges what went wrong and takes steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. Most of the time, a proper safety inspection and official documentation is enough. File the right paperwork, make the violations official, ensure the families get recognition, and the sounds stop. The mines go quiet, but not always. There's a mine up near Beckley where they say you can still hear the shift whistle every night at midnight. Another one outside Welch, where locals report seeing mine cars full of coal rolling down abandoned tracks. And there are newer sites too. Mines that closed in the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, where safety violations are still being covered up by companies that don't want to pay for proper cleanup. I've got files on all of them, maps, inspection reports, corporate documents, showing when safety concerns were ignored. It's become my specialty. Industrial accidents, where the dead don't stay dead because justice was never served. My supervisors think I'm too focused on old history. They want me to concentrate on current environmental issues, not accidents from decades ago. But they don't understand that, in these mountains, the past isn't really past. It's still working underground, still waiting for someone to acknowledge what went wrong. I named my daughter Sarah, after the photography student who died taking pictures of something she probably shouldn't have seen. She's 5 now, and sometimes she asks me why I work so late, reading through old files and writing reports about mines that closed before she was born. I tell her, it's because some jobs can't be finished until they're done right, and some workers deserve better than they got, even if it takes decades to make things fair. Next month, I'm driving up to West Virginia to check out reports from a mine that closed in 1987. Company declared bankruptcy and walked away from their safety obligations. Locals say they hear drilling sounds at night and equipment moving around inside sealed tunnels. Sounds like another unfinished shift to me. Because here's what I learned in Black Damp Hollow. When you die doing a job that someone else made dangerous to save money, you don't get to rest until that someone takes responsibility. The miners aren't haunting these mountains out of anger. They're still working, still trying to keep other people safe. They're the best safety inspectors these mines ever had. They know every violation, every shortcut, every corner that was cut to save $1 while human lives hung in the balance. All they want is for someone with authority to admit what really happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. That's not too much to ask from the people who died keeping our lights on and our steel mills running. The least we can do is finish the job they started. Some shifts run longer than others. But every shift ends eventually, if you're willing to do the work. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger at Pisgah National Forest for 14 years. In all that time studying mountain history, I learned that some events never really end, they just wait in the shadows, ready to pull you back. I'm what you might call a history nerd. Got my PhD in Appalachian settlement patterns, spent most of my adult life tracking down old family records and Cherokee stories. At 38, I'm unmarried by choice, married to these mountains instead. My specialty is historical preservation and visitor education, which means I spend my days teaching tourists about the past while making sure they don't hurt themselves in the present. Looking Glass Rock has been my beat for the past 5 years. It's a massive granite dome that rises 3,969 feet into the North Carolina sky, about 8 miles from the Blue Ridge Parkway. The Cherokee used it as a lookout point for centuries before European settlers arrived in the 1,780 seconds. That's when things got ugly, conflicts between the Cherokee and incoming families that ended in bloodshed and mystery. March 1984 started with one of those weird late winter thaws we get sometimes. Fog banks rolled through the valleys like ghosts, and the weather couldn't make up its mind whether it wanted to be winter or spring. I was used to hikers getting lost in conditions like these, but what happened that month was different. It started with a report from two college kids who'd been camping near Looking Glass Rock. They came stumbling into the ranger station, eyes wide and talking fast about running into colonial reenactors on the hiking trails. They were dressed like people from the 1700s, the girl said, wrapping her hands around a cup of coffee. Perfect costumes, everything hand-sewn, but they were way up on the rock, where you can't even drive equipment. Her boyfriend nodded. And they knew things. Personal things. The older man knew my grandmother's maiden name, stuff that's not in any public records. I've dealt with plenty of weird tourist stories over the years. People see what they want to see in these mountains. But something about their faces bothered me. They weren't the type to make things up for attention. They looked genuinely shaken. "Did you get any pictures?" I asked. They looked at each other. "That's the weird part," the boy said. "Our camera wouldn't work up there. Dead battery, even though it was fully charged that morning." I took down their report and filed it away, figuring I'd do a routine safety check the next morning. Maybe there really was some unauthorized camping group up there, people taking their historical hobby a little too seriously. It wouldn't be the first time. The next day dawned clear and cold. I packed my usual gear, first aid kit, radio, GPS unit, camera, and started up the trail to Looking Glass Rock. The path is steep and rocky, the kind that keeps casual hikers away. You have to really want to get up there. About halfway up, I found the first thing that didn't make sense. It was a button, brass and hand-forged, the kind they used in the late 1700s. I knew because I'd seen dozens of them in museum collections. But this one was lying right on the trail, fresh dirt still clinging to it like it had just been dropped. I picked it up and turned it over in my palm. No machine marks, no modern manufacturing signs, just old, honest metalwork that would cost hundreds of dollars to reproduce accurately today. My first thought was that one of the reenactors had lost it. But as I climbed higher, I found more things. A hand-forged iron buckle, a fragment of hand-woven cloth, a musket ball, flattened like it had hit something hard. All of it scattered along the trail like breadcrumbs leading up to the rock. The hair on my neck started to stand up. In 14 years of walking these mountains, I'd never found artifacts like this. And definitely not lying loose on a hiking trail where hundreds of people passed every month. When I reached the top of Looking Glass Rock, the fog was rolling in thick from the valleys below. The granite dome stretched out like a gray ocean, and visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet in any direction. That's when I heard the voices. Men's voices, speaking in old-fashioned English, with accents I couldn't place. They sounded close, maybe just beyond the fog bank, but I couldn't see anyone. I called out, "Hello, this is the Park Service. Are you folks okay up here?" The voices stopped. Complete silence except for the wind moving through the fog. I waited, listening hard, but heard nothing else. I spent another hour searching the area, but found no sign of any campers or reenactors. No equipment, no footprints, nothing. Just that growing feeling that something was very, very wrong with Looking Glass Rock. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices echoing off the granite. Old voices speaking old words in the fog. The next morning, I decided to go back with better equipment. I packed my digital camera, extra batteries, and a tape recorder. If there really was some historical group camping up there, I wanted documentation. The trail seemed different this time. Darker somehow, even though it was the same path I'd walked hundreds of times. The forest felt too quiet, like the animals were holding their breath. Halfway up, I stopped dead. Someone had arranged stones in a perfect circle right in the middle of the trail. Not random rocks that had rolled down the hillside, deliberately placed stones, each one about the size of a fist, forming a ring maybe 6 feet across. Inside the circle was a piece of parchment, yellow and brittle looking. I knelt down and carefully picked it up. It was a map, hand-drawn in faded brown ink. It showed Looking Glass Rock and the surrounding area, but not as I knew them. The trails were different, following paths that didn't exist anymore. There were structures marked that I'd never seen: cabins, a mill, something labeled trading post. And at the bottom, in careful handwriting, Survey of Cherokee Boundary Lands, Spring 1782. My hands started shaking. This wasn't some tourist's recreation. The paper felt genuinely old, and the ink had that faded quality that takes decades to develop. But 1782 was more than 200 years ago. This should have been in a museum somewhere, not lying on a hiking trail. I photographed everything, then carefully folded the map and put it in my pack. When I looked up, the stone circle was gone. I mean, completely gone. The rocks had scattered back into their random positions along the trail like they'd never been moved. I stared at the spot for a full minute, wondering if I was losing my mind. At the top of Looking Glass Rock, the fog was even thicker than the day before. But this time, I could hear more than voices. There were other sounds drifting through the mist, horses snorting, leather creaking, the clink of metal on metal. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures in the direction of the sounds. The digital display showed normal fog and granite, nothing unusual. But when I checked the photos later, they showed something impossible. In 3 of the shots, I could see people. Men in colonial-era clothing, standing on the rock like they owned it. One was pointing toward the valley below, and his mouth was open like he was shouting orders. Another held what looked like an old musket. But they hadn't been there when I took the pictures. I would have sworn to that in court. I tried the tape recorder next, holding it up toward where the voices seemed strongest. For 10 minutes, I recorded nothing but wind and my own breathing. But when I played it back at the station that night, there were other voices mixed in with mine. Cherokee moving north along the river. Families in the valley don't know we're coming. Take what we can before winter sets. The words were clear enough to understand, but they sounded like they were coming from underwater, or from very far away. And underneath it all was a sound that made my blood run cold, the unmistakable noise of someone sharpening a knife. I played the recording 3 times, each time hearing new details I'd missed before. At one point, clear as day, a voice said, "That ranger woman's been watching us. She knows too much." I hadn't spoken to anyone on the mountain, no one had seen me recording, but somehow they knew I was there. The next morning brought a call from Tim Rodriguez, another ranger who worked the southern section of the park. We'd been friends since I started, and he was one of the few people who took my historical research seriously. "Margaret, I need to ask you something weird," he said. "Have you been having strange dreams lately? Dreams about the 1,780 seconds?" My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "What kind of dreams?" "I keep dreaming I'm a settler named Timothy Rodriguez. Same first name, different last name. I'm part of some kind of raiding party, going after Cherokee villages. But here's the thing, I wake up knowing details I never learned anywhere. Names of Cherokee leaders, locations of villages that aren't on any modern map. Tim, that's impossible. I know it's impossible. That's why I'm calling you. Because I found something this morning that doesn't make sense." He paused, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. I was going through some old land records at the county courthouse, trying to track down information about early settlements. And Margaret, I found a Timothy Rodriguez listed in the 1782 census records. He was part of a militia group that operated around Looking Glass Rock. My mouth went dry. Coincidence? Rodriguez isn't that uncommon a name. The physical description matches me exactly. Height, eye color, even a scar on his left hand from a knife accident. Margaret, I have that same scar. Got it when I was 12, cutting wood with my grandfather. I set down my coffee cup because my hands were shaking too badly to hold it steady. "Tim, you need to stay away from Looking Glass Rock." "Why? What's going on up there?" I told him about the artifacts, the voices, the photographs that showed people who weren't there. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Margaret," he said finally, "I think we're in trouble, because I've been having this overwhelming urge to visit Looking Glass Rock. Like something's calling me up there. Don't go. Whatever you do, don't go up there alone." But even as I said it, I knew he would. The same way I knew I would keep going back, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay away. Something on that mountain wanted us, and it was getting stronger. Tim went missing on a Thursday. He'd called in that morning saying he was doing a routine trail check in the southern section, but by evening, he hadn't returned to the station. His truck was found at the Looking Glass Rock trailhead, keys still in the ignition. I organized the search party myself, leading 6 volunteers up the trail I knew too well. We found Tim's radio first, smashed against a tree like someone had thrown it in anger. His backpack was scattered across the trail 50 yards farther up, contents spilling out like he'd been running. But it was what we found at the top that made my blood freeze. Someone had carved words into the granite surface of the rock. Fresh cuts, the the stone dust still white against the gray surface. Timothy Rodriguez joined the Brotherhood. 1782. Below that, in smaller letters, Margaret Thornfield. Your time is coming. Chief, one of the volunteers called from across the dome. You need to see this. He was standing next to what looked like an old campfire ring, but the stones were arranged in a pattern I recognized from my Cherokee research. It was a sacred circle, the kind used for time ceremonies. Inside the ring were items that shouldn't exist: a colonial-era musket, a Cherokee tomahawk, and a leather journal tied with a strip of rawhide. With shaking hands, I opened the journal. The first page was written in Tim's handwriting. Asterisk, the 15th of March, 1782. Joined Captain Morrison's volunteer company today. We aim to clear the Cherokee from the Looking Glass territory before they can establish permanent villages. The land is too valuable to leave in savage hands. Asterisk. Asterisk, the 18th of March, 1782. Scouted Cherokee positions along the river. Found evidence of winter camps, but no people. They're moving north faster than we expected. Captain says, we'll catch them at the sacred site they call the Mirror Rock. Asterisk. Asterisk. The 20th of March, 1782. Strange dreams last night. Kept seeing a woman in unusual clothes, carrying impossible tools. She had sad eyes and kept trying to warn us about something. Captain Morrison says the Cherokee use magic to confuse white men's minds. I think he's right. Asterisk. The handwriting was definitely Tim's, but the paper was old and yellow, the ink faded with age. The journal was falling apart like it had been written 200 years ago. I flipped to the last entry. Asterisk, the 22nd of March, 1782. Today we learned the truth. The Cherokee aren't the enemy. Something else lives on this mountain, something that feeds on violence and hate. It's been playing both sides, making us fight each other so it can grow stronger. I tried to warn the others, but they can't hear me anymore. The mountain has them now. Asterisk. Asterisk. I think I'm next. If anyone finds this, stay away from Looking Glass Rock. Don't let it remember you. Asterisk. Asterisk. Margaret, if you're reading this, you're already too late. It knows about you now. Asterisk. The journal ended there, but the last line was written in different ink, like someone had added it recently. That night, I took the journal home and sat at my kitchen table, trying to make sense of what was happening. I'd lost a friend, maybe permanently. I'd found evidence that suggested he was somehow living in the 1,780 seconds, and according to that final entry, I was next. I pulled out my research files on Looking Glass Rock, spreading newspaper clippings and historical documents across the table. If Tim was right about something supernatural on the mountain, maybe I could find other evidence. What I found made me sick. Every 20 to 30 years since 1782, people had gone missing around Looking Glass Rock. Sometimes hikers, sometimes researchers, like me, sometimes locals who knew better but went up there anyway. The disappearances followed a pattern. They always happened during periods of historical research or conflict reenactment activities. In 1823, a genealogist named Margaret Thornfield had vanished while researching Cherokee land claims. Same name as me, but that was impossible. My family didn't come to North Carolina until the 1,920 seconds. In 1854, a land surveyor named Timothy Rodriguez was found dead at the base of Looking Glass Rock, apparently having fallen from the top. But witnesses reported seeing him talking to people who weren't there just before he fell. The pattern repeated every generation, different people, but always the same names, always connected to historical research, always near Looking Glass Rock. I was looking at my own obituary from 1823 when the phone rang. Margaret? The voice was weak and distant, full of static. Tim, where are you? I'm not sure. It's 1,782, but it's also now. The mountain exists in all times at once, Margaret. It's some kind of Cherokee time magic, but it's gone wrong. It's supposed to preserve important events, but someone corrupted it. The connection was terrible, like he was calling from another country. Tim, where are you physically? I'll come get you. You can't. I'm in the past, but I can see the future. Margaret, it's using us to anchor itself in modern times. Every time someone with our names comes to the mountain, it pulls us into the historical pattern. We become part of the loop. What loop? The massacre, The 22nd of March, 1782. Cherokee warriors and colonial militia fighting over Looking Glass Rock. But they weren't really fighting each other, they were fighting something else, something that needed their violence to survive. The line crackled, and his voice faded. "Margaret, don't come up here. Break the pattern. Change your name. Leave the state. Do something, too." The call cut off. I sat in the dark kitchen, staring at the dead phone. Outside, fog was rolling in from the mountains, thick and unnatural. Through the window, I could see it moving like it had a purpose, flowing toward my house. That's when I noticed the figure standing in my backyard. It was a Cherokee man in traditional clothing, but he was translucent, like a double-exposed photograph. He was pointing toward Looking Glass Rock and mouthing words I couldn't hear. I opened the back door. "What are you trying to tell me?" He pointed again, more urgently this time. Then he held up his hands, showing me 10 fingers. Then again, he was counting down. 20. I had 20 of something. Then he pointed to the sky. And I understood. 20 hours until the sun reached the same position it had been on the 22nd of March, 1782. 20 hours until whatever happened up there would happen again. The Cherokee man faded away, but his message was clear. I had until tomorrow night to either stop this thing or become part of it forever. The fog reached my house and pressed against the windows like searching fingers. Inside its gray depths, I could see shapes moving. Colonial soldiers and Cherokee warriors, locked in an eternal battle that would continue until someone broke the pattern. I was the only one who could do it. But first, I had to figure out what had really happened on Looking Glass Rock 200 years ago. I spent the night reading every Cherokee legend I could find about Looking Glass Rock. According to the old stories, the mountain was a place where time could be folded, where important events could be preserved forever. Cherokee shamans used it to keep their history alive, to make sure certain truths would never be forgotten. But something had gone wrong in 1782. A trader named Morrison had been selling weapons to both the Cherokee and the colonial militia, playing both sides while telling each group that the other was planning attacks. The Cherokee shamans discovered his deception and tried to use the time magic to expose him, to preserve the truth of his betrayal for future generations. Morrison killed the shaman before the ceremony was complete. The time magic, suddenly without direction, latched onto the violence and trauma of that moment. Instead of preserving truth, it began preserving the hate and fear, creating an endless loop that fed on conflict. Every few decades, when the pattern was strongest, it would pull people into the loop. People whose names and backgrounds matched the original participants, forcing them to relive the massacre over and over. Tim and I weren't the first Margaret Thornfield and Timothy Rodriguez to disappear. We were just the latest in a long line of people chosen to fuel the mountain's hunger. As the sun set on March 22, I drove to Looking Glass Rock. I had a plan, but I wasn't sure it would work. The Cherokee legends said the time magic could only be broken by completing the original ceremony, revealing the truth about Morrison's betrayal. The fog was waiting for me at the trailhead, thick as soup and glowing with an unnatural light. As I started up the path, I could hear voices calling from within it, Tim's voice and others I didn't recognize. "Margaret, turn back," Tim called. "It's starting, you can still get away." But I couldn't turn back. Even if I wanted to, my legs kept moving toward the top of the rock. The mountain was pulling me in. The trail changed as I climbed. Modern improvements faded away, replaced by the narrow deer paths that had existed in 1782. The fog cleared gradually, revealing a world that shouldn't exist. Looking Glass Rock was covered with people from 2 different centuries. Colonial militiamen in rough clothing stood next to Cherokee warriors in traditional dress. But they weren't fighting each other, they were all staring at me. In the center of the granite dome stood Morrison. He was a big man with cruel eyes and a traitor's smile. In his hands he held a Cherokee ceremonial staff, its carved symbols glowing with power. "Margaret Thornfield," he said in a voice that echoed across time. "Right on schedule. We've been waiting for you." Around him, I could see the other people who'd been trapped in the loop over the centuries. Different faces, but all wearing the clothes and carrying the names of the original participants. Tim was there, dressed as a colonial militiaman, his eyes empty and lost. "You can't keep doing this," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "These people don't deserve to be trapped here." Morrison laughed. "Deserve? I'm preserving history. Every generation gets to experience the truth of what happened here, the violence that built this country, the hatred that shaped these mountains. Without conflict, without fear, people forget. They get soft. He raised the ceremonial staff. Join us, Margaret. Take your place in the eternal lesson. The Cherokee warriors and colonial militiamen began moving toward me, their faces blank and purposeful. But I noticed something Morrison hadn't. Some of the Cherokee participants weren't moving. They were watching, waiting. I pulled out the journal I'd taken from Tim's belongings, the one with entries from 1782. But instead of reading from it, I tore out the pages and scattered them on the granite. "This isn't preservation," I shouted. "This is corruption. You're not preserving truth, you're feeding on hate." The scattered pages began to glow, and suddenly I could see what had really happened in 1782. Not the endless battle Morrison had created, but the actual events. The Cherokee shaman hadn't died fighting Morrison. He died protecting him, trying to save a man who was too consumed by greed to be saved. Morrison had killed the shaman not in battle, but in cold blood, while the man was trying to heal him. The time magic had preserved that moment of betrayal, but Morrison had twisted it, making it look like a battle instead of a murder. "No," Morrison snarled, "they won't understand. They need the simple version, good versus evil, us versus them. That's how you build a nation. That's how you build a lie," I said. I picked up the ceremonial staff where the Cherokee shaman had dropped it 2 centuries ago. The moment my hands touched it, I could feel the true time magic flowing through me. Not Morrison's corrupted version, but the original power, the ability to preserve truth. Morrison lunged at me, but he was too late. I plunged the staff into the granite surface of Looking Glass Rock, right where the shaman's blood had first awakened the time magic. The world exploded into light and sound. I could hear Morrison screaming as his false version of history crumbled away. The trapped people, Tim and all the others, suddenly looked around in confusion as the spell holding them broke. For a moment, I could see both timelines at once. The real one, 1782, where a Cherokee shaman died trying to heal the wounds between his people and the newcomers. And Morrison's version, where that same death had been turned into fuel for centuries of hatred. The real version was beautiful and sad and honest. Morrison's version was just hungry. The light faded, and I found myself alone on Looking Glass Rock. The fog was gone, the voices were silent, and the granite felt normal under my feet, just rock, nothing more. But I wasn't really alone. Tim sat a few yards away, looking dazed but alive. Around us, translucent figures were fading away, the Cherokee shaman, the colonial militiamen, everyone who had been trapped in Morrison's lie. The Cherokee shaman nodded to me once before he disappeared. In his eyes, I saw gratitude and something else, a warning. Morrison was gone, but the hunger he'd awakened would find new places to feed. The official report said Tim and I had gotten lost in unusual fog conditions and suffered from exposure-related disorientation. The area around Looking Glass Rock was temporarily closed for geological instability studies, which was the government's way of saying they didn't want to explain what had really happened. Tim didn't remember much about his time in 1782, which was probably a blessing. He transferred to a different park system the following month, saying he needed a change of scenery. I understood. Some experiences change you in ways that make it impossible to go back to normal life. I stayed at Pisgah National Forest, but my focus changed completely. Instead of just studying Appalachian settlement patterns, I started researching temporal anomaly sites, places where traumatic historical events had left supernatural scars. I found more than I wanted to. The Cherokee territory was full of spots like Looking Glass Rock, places where violence had been twisted into something hungry, where the past refused to stay buried. Most were dormant, waiting for the right combination of circumstances to wake up. I started keeping detailed records, mapping the sites, and looking for patterns. I reached out to other rangers, other historians, anyone who might have encountered similar phenomena. Slowly, I put together a network of people who understood that some places remember everything, and that sometimes those memories can be dangerous. The hardest part was accepting that I couldn't save everyone. Morrison had been feeding on that mountain for over 200 years, and he was just one of many entities that had learned to twist historical trauma into supernatural power. There were others out there, in different places, using different methods but serving the same hungry purpose. 6 months after the incident at Looking Glass Rock, I got a call from a historian in Tennessee. She'd been researching Civil War battle sites and had started experiencing what she called temporal displacement episodes. Soldiers from both armies appearing in the fog, reliving the same battle over and over. Her name was Margaret Thornfield. I drove to Tennessee that weekend. Some patterns run deeper than individual lives, deeper than specific places. Some hungers learn to adapt, to find new ways to feed. Morrison was gone, but the thing that had corrupted the time magic was still out there, still looking for suitable hosts. Now I spend my time teaching other people how to recognize the warning signs, how to break the patterns before they become traps. It's not easy work. Most people don't want to believe that history can reach out and grab them. They prefer to think the past is safely buried. But I've learned that nothing is ever safely buried in these mountains. The Cherokee knew that they built their time magic specifically to preserve important truths. They understood that some events are too significant to forget, too powerful to let fade away. The tragedy is that people like Morrison learn to corrupt that wisdom, turning preservation into exploitation, memory into feeding grounds for entities that grow stronger on human pain and conflict. I still live near Pisgah National Forest, still work as a ranger and day, but now I have a different mission. I'm a caretaker of dangerous memories, a guardian against the things that feed on historical trauma. And sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls in from the mountains, I can hear Morrison's voice calling from somewhere beyond time, promising that he's not finished with me. That sooner or later, I'll make a mistake, and when I do, he'll be waiting. Maybe he's right. Maybe the pattern is too strong to break permanently, but until that day comes, I'll keep fighting, because I've seen what happens when the past is allowed to devour the present, and I won't let it happen again. At least, not on my watch. The mountains remember everything. My job is to make sure they remember the truth. My name is Samuel Whitethorn, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. In all that time walking these Kentucky mountains, I learned to trust my gut when something feels wrong. The forest talks to you, if you listen, tells you when storms are coming, when animals are spooked, when danger's near. But that day in June of 1973, the forest went silent. That should have been my first warning. I was stationed at Daniel Boone National Forest, working the Red River Gorge area. My specialty was wilderness emergency medical response. Basically, I was the guy they called when hikers got hurt in places ambulances couldn't reach. Before becoming a ranger, I'd been a paramedic in Louisville for 8 years, seen plenty of bad things, thought I knew what real trouble looked like. The heat that summer was brutal. We'd been in drought for 2 months straight, and the Forest Service had us all on high alert for fires. Every day hit over 90 degrees, and the humidity made it feel like walking through soup. Even the hardiest plants were wilting. Animals stayed hidden in whatever shade they could find. That's when I got the radio call about Preacher's Hollow. "Sam, we got a situation," crackled through my walkie. It was dispatch, sounding more worried than usual. Youth group from Lexington went on a camping trip 3 days ago. Should have been back yesterday. Pastor called it in this morning. I grabbed my medical kit and started hiking toward the coordinates they gave me. Preacher's Hollow was about 22 miles from the nearest road, tucked away in a box canyon that most folks didn't even know existed. You had to walk through a narrow gorge to get there. And even then, you might miss it if you didn't know exactly where to look. The name always bothered me. Local people had been calling it that since before I was born, but nobody could tell you why. Some said it was because the rock formations looked like a pulpit. Others claimed a preacher used to hold services there back in the old days. All I knew was that hikers sometimes reported strange things in that area. Weird noises, bad feelings, equipment going haywire for no reason. As I hiked deeper into the forest, the silence grew heavier. No bird songs, no insect buzz. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the air itself was swallowing sound. The trees looked sick, their leaves brown and curled despite the deep shade. I'd seen drought damage before, but this was different. This felt deliberate. The gorge entrance appeared after 2 hours of climbing. It was barely wide enough for one person, with smooth stone walls rising 50 feet on both sides. The temperature dropped as soon as I stepped inside, which should have felt good after the heat. Instead, it made me shiver. At the far end of the gorge, the walls opened up into a perfect circle of stone. Preacher's Hollow spread before me like a natural amphitheater, maybe 100 yards across and surrounded by towering cliffs. At the center sat a flat platform of white stone that looked almost like an altar. And there were the kids. 12 teenagers sat in a perfect semicircle around the stone platform. They didn't move when I called out, didn't even look up. They just sat there in the blazing sun, heads bowed like they were praying. Their pastor, a man I recognized as Williams from the Baptist church in town, stood behind them with his hands raised to the sky. "Pastor Williams," I shouted, jogging toward them. "Everyone okay? We've been looking for you." None of them responded. As I got closer, I could hear them speaking, but not to me. They were reciting something together, their voices blending into one eerie chorus. "And the faithful shall gather in the hollow place, where the earth drinks deep of sacrifice, and the shepherd calls his flock to eternal pasture." The words made my skin crawl. This wasn't any Bible verse I'd ever heard, and I'd been studying scripture since I was old enough to read. I was even taking seminary classes part-time, hoping to become a chaplain when I retired from ranger work. "Hey!" I called louder, dropping my pack and pulling out my first aid kit. "Can anyone hear me?" That's when Pastor Williams finally turned around. His eyes were completely white, not rolled back, but white all the way through, like they'd been painted over. When he smiled, his teeth looked too sharp. "Brother Samuel," he said in a voice that didn't sound quite right, "we've been waiting for you to join us in worship." I'd seen heat stroke plenty of times, and this looked like a bad case. Hallucinations, group disorientation, dehydration, it all made sense. These people had been sitting in direct sunlight for hours, maybe days. They needed medical attention, fast. "Pastor Williams, I need you to help me get these kids into the shade," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "They're showing signs of severe heat exhaustion." But Williams just kept smiling that wrong smile. "The heat purifies, brother, burns away the flesh so the spirit can soar free." I tried my radio. Static filled the channel, but underneath it, I could swear I heard organ music. Old hymns played in a minor key. I switched channels, tried again. Same thing. The kids kept chanting. I knelt beside the nearest one, a girl maybe 16 years old. Her skin was burning hot, but she wasn't sweating. That was bad. It meant her body had stopped trying to cool itself. When I checked her pulse, it was racing like a hummingbird's. "Can you hear me, honey?" I asked, but she didn't react. Her lips just kept moving with the rest of them, where the shepherd calls his flock to eternal pasture. I pulled out my emergency IV kit, but when I tried to start a line in her arm, my equipment wouldn't work. The needle bent like it hit steel. The blood pressure cuff wouldn't inflate. Even my thermometer gave impossible readings. Negative temperatures in 100-degree heat. That's when I noticed the smell. It was sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. Underneath that was something else, something rotten and thick that caught in my throat. I looked around for the source and spotted a natural spring about 30 yards away. The water looked clear, but flies swarmed above it in angry black clouds. I'd seen contaminated water sources before. Sometimes chemicals seep up from old mine operations, or natural gas creates toxic pools. That would explain the hallucinations, the group behavior, everything. These people had been drinking poisoned water for days. "That's it," I muttered, pulling out water purification tablets and my backup radio. Water contamination, simple solution. But when I tried to approach the spring, my feet wouldn't move. It was like walking through invisible molasses. Each step required enormous effort, and the closer I got, the heavier the air became. The sweet smell grew stronger, making my head spin. Then I saw the flowers. Fresh roses circled the spring's edge. Bright red roses that couldn't possibly grow in this climate, in this drought, in this rocky soil. They looked like they'd been placed there minutes ago. Yet the closest flower shop was 40 miles away. Behind me, the chanting grew louder. I turned back toward the group and froze. There were more people now. At least 20 adults in old-fashioned clothes, long dresses on the women, dark suits on the men despite the heat. They sat behind the teenagers, their faces hidden by wide-brimmed hats and bonnets. When had they arrived? I should have heard them coming through the gorge. "Pastor Williams," I called, my voice shakier than I wanted. Where did these people come from? Williams turned those painted white eyes on me again. "They never left, brother. The faithful remain always in the hollow place." I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. The heat was getting to me too. Had to be. When I looked again, the adults were still there, but something was wrong with the picture. They sat perfectly still, too still. No one shifted position, scratched an itch, adjusted clothing. They were like mannequins, posed for a department store window, and their clothes looked wrong for 1,973. The dresses were ankle-length with high necks and long sleeves. The men wore formal suits with vests and pocket watches. Even accounting for rural Kentucky being behind fashion trends, this looked like something from my grandfather's time. I tried my radio again. Still static, still that organ music underneath. But now I could make out words being sung. Come to the hollow, leave flesh behind, join the eternal, the forever kind, where time stands still and souls don't age. In the shepherd's book, turn the final page. The song made my teeth ache. I clicked off the radio and focused on what I could control. These people needed medical help, hallucinations or no hallucinations. I had training, equipment, and experience. I could handle this. But when I turned back to check on the teenagers, my blood went cold. They weren't wearing the same clothes anymore. The boys now wore dark suits identical to the strange adults. The girls had on long dresses that covered them from neck to ankle. The modern camping gear, backpacks, hiking boots, water bottles, had vanished. In its place were old-fashioned picnic baskets and glass mason jars. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. Heat stroke couldn't cause this. Water contamination couldn't do this. This was impossible. Pastor Williams stepped toward me, his white eyes gleaming. Don't fight it, Brother Samuel. The shepherd has been waiting so long for a man of faith to join his flock. Behind him, every single person, the teenagers, the adults in old clothes, all of them, turned to look at me. Their faces were pale as milk, their eyes dark holes in their skulls. And they all smiled, those two sharp smiles. I ran. My ranger training kicked in, and I sprinted toward the gorge entrance as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I heard laughter. Not the warm, joyful sound you'd expect from a church group, but something cold and hungry. The gorge walls seemed to stretch as I ran, like the passage was growing longer with each step. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I kept pushing forward. Finally, I burst out into the main forest and collapsed against a pine tree, gasping. My radio crackled. Clear signal now, no static. Sam, this is dispatch. What's your status? I need backup, I panted into the receiver. Medical emergency at Preacher's Hollow. Multiple victims showing signs of. How could I explain what I'd seen? Heat stroke didn't make people's clothes change. Contaminated water didn't conjure phantom congregations from thin air. Signs of what, Sam? Possible chemical contamination, I said finally. It was the only explanation that made sense. I need hazmat team and medical support. Lots of it. Copy that. Teams en route. ETA 4 hours. You need extraction? I looked back toward the gorge. In daylight, it looked like any other rock formation. Nothing special, nothing threatening. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Heat exhaustion could cause hallucinations. I'd been hiking for hours in brutal temperature. Negative, I replied. I'll maintain watch until backup arrives. But I wasn't going back in that canyon. Not yet. Instead, I made camp at the tree line where I could see both the gorge entrance and any approaching vehicles. As evening fell, I tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The teenagers were real. I'd touched them, checked their vitals. The pastor was real too. The rest, maybe toxic fumes from the spring, had affected my perception. Chemical contamination could explain everything. The hallucinations, the equipment malfunctions, even the feeling of wrongness in the air. Around midnight, I heard singing. It drifted from the canyon like smoke, barely audible but clear enough to understand. The same hymn I'd heard on my radio, but now I could make out all the words. Come to the hollow, leave flesh behind, join the eternal, the forever kind, where time stands still and souls don't age. In the shepherd's book, turn the final page. The shepherd calls from the sacred stone. No more sorrow, no more alone. Drink from the spring of forever sleep, where the faithful their promise keep. I grabbed my flashlight and crept closer to the gorge. The singing grew louder, echoing off stone walls. But it wasn't just the teenagers anymore. I could hear dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all blending into one massive choir. At the canyon entrance, I clicked on my light and peered inside. The passage was packed with people. They filled every inch of space between the walls. Men, women, children, all wearing clothes from different eras. I saw bonnets and top hats from the 1800s, flapper dresses from the 1922, zoot suits from the 1942. They stood shoulder to shoulder, facing toward the hollow, singing that awful hymn. None of them cast shadows. I stumbled backward, clicking off my light. When I looked again, the passage was empty, just smooth stone walls and darkness. Chemical contamination, I whispered to myself. That's all, toxic fumes. But deep down, I knew better. 17 years in these mountains had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming that something evil lived in Preacher's Hollow. Something that had been there long before this youth group arrived. I spent the rest of the night researching in my truck, digging through old files and local history books I kept for emergencies. What I found made my blood run cold. Preacher's Hollow had a history. In 1894, a man named Ezekiel Thorne had started a religious commune there, called himself a prophet, claimed God spoke to him directly through the spring water. He'd gathered about 60 followers, families seeking spiritual renewal in the wilderness. The commune lasted exactly 1 year. In June 1895, every single member was found dead around that stone platform. They'd drunk from the spring, which investigators later discovered contained high levels of natural arsenic. The official report called it mass suicide, but witnesses described the bodies arranged in perfect worship formation, as if they'd died in the middle of a service. Ezekiel Thorne's body was never found. According to the old newspapers, strange things had happened at the site ever since. Hikers reported hearing sermons preached in dead languages. Campers found their belongings arranged like religious offerings. Several people over the decades had claimed to see ghostly congregations gathered around the stone altar. Most disturbing was a pattern I noticed in the incident reports. Every 20 years or so, someone disappeared near Preacher's Hollow. Always during June. Always during heat waves. Always people with strong religious backgrounds. 1915. Minister from Lexington, found days later babbling about eternal services. 1935. Traveling preacher, discovered sitting by the spring, couldn't remember his own name. 1955. Church youth group leader, never found at all. The timing made my stomach turn. It was June 1973, 18 years since the last incident. Close enough. Dawn was breaking when I saw the figure walking toward my camp. It was Pastor Williams, but not the man I'd known from town. This version looked older, thinner, with those terrible white eyes and that wrong smile. He moved without making sound, his feet barely touching the ground. "Brother Samuel," he called in that voice that wasn't quite his own. "The shepherd wishes to speak with you." I grabbed my radio, my medical kit, anything that might help, but Williams just stood there, waiting patiently while I gathered my gear. "The others are worried," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Families are looking for those kids." "Families?" Williams tilted his head like he didn't understand the word. "We are family now. All of us, together in the hollow place, forever and ever, amen." He turned and walked back toward the canyon. After a moment's hesitation, I followed. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't leave those teenagers to whatever fate awaited them. My job was to help people, and I'd failed at that too many times already. The gorge passage felt different in daylight, longer, more twisted, like walking through a maze. Williams glided ahead of me, never looking back, humming that awful hymn under his breath. When we reached the hollow, I gasped. The entire space was filled with people. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all sitting in perfect rows around the stone platform. Men, women, children from every era of American history. They watched me with dark, hungry eyes as I walked past. At the center of it all, standing on the white stone altar, was a tall man in a black coat. His hair was silver, his beard neatly trimmed, and his eyes burned like hot coals. Even from a distance, I could feel the wrongness radiating from him like heat from a furnace. The teenagers sat in the front row, still chanting, still dressed in those old-fashioned clothes. But now I could see what had happened to them. Their skin was pale as paper, their eyes dark and empty. They looked like dolls made of wax and shadows. "Welcome, Brother Samuel," the man on the altar called out. His voice carried perfectly across the hollow without echoing. "I am Ezekiel Thorne, shepherd of the eternal flock. We've been waiting for you to join our service." I stood at the edge of the crowd, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every face turned toward me was dead, had to be dead. Some looked fresh, like they'd died yesterday. Others were ancient, their skin yellow as old parchment. But they all watched me with the same hungry expression. "You're not real," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is heat stroke, or poisoned water, or—" Ezekiel Thorne laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Real? Brother Samuel, what is real? The flesh that rots and dies? The world that withers in drought and flame? Or the eternal spirit that never knows hunger, never knows pain, never knows the fear of ending?" He stepped down from the altar, moving through the crowd like water. They parted before him without sound, their heads bowing as he passed. When he reached me, I smelled that sweet, rotten smell again, like flowers at a funeral. "You serve God, don't you?" Thorne asked, circling me slowly. "Study his word, help his children, dedicate your life to faith?" "Yes," I answered, because it was true. It was the only thing that had ever mattered to me. "Then you understand sacrifice. Abraham's willingness to give up Isaac, Christ's blood on the cross. The faithful have always known that eternal life requires a price." He gestured toward the spring, where roses still bloomed impossibly bright in the drought. "This place is holy, Brother Samuel, consecrated by the blood of the willing. Here, death has no sting, time has no meaning. My flock will worship forever, never aging, never dying, never alone." I looked at the teenagers again. They weren't moving now, just sitting perfectly still like everyone else. Their chests didn't rise and fall with breathing. "You killed them," I said. "Killed?" Thorne shook his head sadly. "I freed them. From doubt, from fear, from the terrible burden of mortality. They chose to drink from the sacred spring, to join our eternal service. They're children. They are souls," he corrected. "Infinite and precious. And now they will sing God's praises for all eternity." The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't contaminated water or mass hallucination. This thing, this corrupted spirit that had once been a man, was collecting souls, building a congregation of the dead to feed his own twisted vision of faith. "The drought," I realized. "You caused it." Thorne smiled, and for a moment I saw past his human mask to something ancient and hungry beneath. "I called the heat, yes, drew these faithful children to my hollow place, as I have every 20 years since my own transformation. Each generation brings new voices to our choir." He reached out to touch my shoulder, and where his fingers made contact, I felt cold spread through my body like poison. "You feel it, don't you? The weight of flesh, the fear of ending. I can take that burden from you, Brother Samuel, give you peace eternal." For just a moment, I was tempted. 17 years of wilderness rescue had shown me too much death, too much suffering. How many times had I arrived too late, found bodies instead of survivors? How many families had I failed to reunite? The idea of never feeling that pain again, never losing another person to the unforgiving mountains. Then I heard a sound that changed everything. It was small, almost lost in the chorus of dead voices. But I'd been a paramedic long enough to recognize it anywhere. The faint wheeze of someone struggling to breathe. One of the teenagers was still alive. I couldn't see which one from where I stood, but somewhere in that front row, a heart was still beating. Someone was still fighting, still holding on to life despite whatever poison they'd consumed. "No," I said, pulling away from Thorne's touch. "This isn't faith. This is murder dressed up in scripture." His friendly mask slipped, revealing the burning fury beneath. "Foolish mortal, you understand nothing of divine purpose." "I understand enough," I shot back, reaching into my medical kit. "I know the difference between true faith and false prophecy. I know that God doesn't demand the deaths of children." I pulled out a small silver cross, nothing fancy, just something my grandmother had given me when I started seminary studies. The moment it touched my palm, the entire congregation hissed like steam from a boiler. Thorne stepped backward, his face twisting with rage. "Superstitious trinkets have no power here." "You're right," I agreed, closing my fingers around the cross. "This doesn't have power, but faith does. Real faith. the kind that protects the innocent and stands against evil, no matter what form it takes. I started reciting the 23rd Psalm, the words coming automatically from years of study. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. The dead congregation began to wail, a sound like wind through broken glass. Some of them started to fade, becoming translucent as ghosts. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Thorn lunged at me with fingers like claws, but the cross in my hand blazed with warm light. Where the light touched him, his flesh burned and peeled away, revealing the rotting corpse beneath. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. More spirits began to disappear, their forms dissolving like morning mist. But I could see the real people now, the teenagers and Pastor Williams, still breathing, still alive despite whatever they'd been forced to drink. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Ezekiel Thorne screamed, a sound that shattered rocks and sent birds flying for miles. His false holy man appearance crumbled completely, revealing a thing of shadow and hunger that had never been human at all. For you are with me, your rod and your staff they comfort me. The creature that had been calling itself Thorn made one final desperate lunge, but the light from my cross had grown too bright. It struck him like a physical force, and he exploded into writhing smoke that dispersed on a wind that smelled of roses and spring rain. The hollow fell silent except for the sound of real breathing from real lungs. I found the living teenager first, a boy named Marcus, barely 16, who was conscious but confused. He'd only taken a few sips from the spring before something inside him rebelled against the poison. The others had drunk deeper, but they were alive, all of them. Unconscious, dehydrated, but alive. Pastor Williams came around as I was starting IVs. "Samuel?" he asked, blinking in confusion. "What happened? Where are we?" "Long story," I said, checking his pulse. "Right now, I need you to help me get these kids stable until the medical team arrives." The hazmat team found us 3 hours later, just as I'd finished treating the last of the victims. They tested everything: the water, the air, the soil around that stone platform. Found nothing dangerous, which didn't surprise me. Whatever evil had lived in Preacher's Hollow was gone now, along with its poisoned spring. The official report blamed a gas leak from an underground pocket of natural methane. The teenagers had been hallucinating from oxygen deprivation, and I'd suffered similar effects until a shift in air currents cleared the contamination. Simple, scientific, rational. Nobody mentioned the roses that had withered and died the moment Ezekiel Thorne disappeared. Nobody talked about the clothes that had somehow changed back to modern camping gear while the kids were unconscious. And nobody asked why my radio recordings from that day contained 4 straight hours of hymns sung in languages that linguists couldn't identify. The kids recovered completely. They didn't remember much about their time in the hollow, just feeling sleepy and having strange dreams about church services. Pastor Williams remembered more, but he never talked about it. When I saw him in town months later, he'd transferred to a different parish and stopped doing wilderness retreats. I kept working as a ranger, but something had changed in me. My faith was stronger now, tested by real evil and proven true, but it was also more careful, more watchful. I'd learned that not everything that calls itself holy actually is. 6 months later, I got a call from a fellow ranger in Tennessee. Tourist family had gone missing near an old mining town called Prophet's Ridge. Local folklore talked about a preacher who used to hold services in the abandoned mine shafts, promising his followers that death in the deep places would bring eternal life. I packed my gear and drove south, that silver cross safely pinned inside my jacket, because I'd learned something important in Preacher's Hollow. Evil doesn't stay buried forever. It finds new forms, new faces, new ways to twist faith into something hungry and dark. But real faith, the kind that protects rather than consumes, that serves rather than demands worship, that can stand against any darkness. Even in the deepest hollows where lost things gather and false shepherds call their flocks. My name is Samuel Whitethorn. I've been a ranger for 18 years now, and I've seen things that would make most folks question their sanity. But I've also seen the power of genuine faith to drive back the shadows. And in these mountains, where old evils sleep restless in forgotten places, that knowledge might be the most important equipment I carry. The work continues. My name is Robert Stillwater, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years. Before that, I spent 8 years with the ATF. That's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. My grandfather used to tell stories about chasing bootleggers through these same mountains during Prohibition. Back then, he was a federal agent too. I guess law enforcement runs in the family. I never believed in ghosts. Not until April of 1967, when I learned some crimes never really close. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 2 hikers reported finding what looked like a working moonshine still near Cataract Falls. That's deep backcountry, 16 miles from the park boundary, no maintained trails. You need to know these mountains like your own backyard to find that place. I loaded my pack with the usual gear: camera, evidence bags, radio equipment. The spring rains had been heavy that year, and the creeks were running high and dangerous. Perfect weather for someone trying to hide illegal activity. The hike took me most of the day. Cataract Falls sits at 3,200 feet, where 3 streams come together to form a series of waterfalls. It's beautiful country, but isolated. The kind of place where you could run an operation for months without anyone knowing. As I got closer, I started smelling something wrong. Not wrong exactly, but out of place. Corn mash, the sour, yeasty smell of fermentation, and wood smoke, though I couldn't see any fire. The still sat in a clearing about 50 yards from the main waterfall. It was old-fashioned, copper pot, coil condenser, the works. But it looked freshly made, not like some historical leftover. Steam was rising from the pot, and I could hear the gentle bubbling of an active distillation. That's when things got strange. I called out, "Park Service. Anyone here needs to come out now." No answer, just the sound of running water and that steady bubbling. I approached carefully, hand on my radio. The equipment was warm to the touch, recently used. Mason jars sat filled with clear liquid, moonshine, and it smelled like good stuff too. But there was no one around. No footprints in the soft ground around the still, no tire tracks, no path through the woods that I could see. I took photos and started gathering evidence. That's when my metal detector started going crazy. It was picking up signals everywhere. But when I dug, I found nothing but old dirt and rocks. The needle jumped around like it was reading ghost metal. I tried my radio, nothing but static. The smart thing would have been to hike back out and return with backup. But something about that place made me want to stay. Maybe it was my ATF training. When you find an active still, you secure it. Or maybe it was something else, something I can't explain. I set up camp about 100 yards away, where I could watch the clearing. As the sun went down, the woods got quiet in a way that felt wrong. Too quiet. Even the creek seemed to whisper instead of flow. That's when I saw the lights. Not flashlights, something softer, warmer. Like lantern light, moving through the trees toward the still. I grabbed my own flashlight and moved closer, staying in the shadows. 3 men worked around the equipment. I couldn't see them clearly. They seemed to fade in and out like heat shimmer. But I could hear them talking, low voices with old mountain accents. "Federal boys coming tomorrow," one said. "Got to get this batch finished tonight. Been running this hauler for 3 years," another replied. "Ain't no government man gonna shut us down now." I knew I should radio for backup, but my radio was still dead. I knew I should retreat and get help, but I also knew these men weren't supposed to be here. And something about their voices, their clothes, the way they moved, it all seemed wrong, like they belonged to a different time. I watched them work through the night. They moved with the easy skill of men who'd been making moonshine all their lives. But as dawn approached, they began to fade away like morning mist. By full daylight, the clearing was empty again. The still sat cold and silent. But fresh moonshine filled a dozen new jars that hadn't been there the night before. That's when I found the bullet holes in the trees. Fresh bullet holes, the wood still bleeding sap, and carved into an old oak, still sharp and clear. April 15, 1925. They came at dawn. I'd been a lawman long enough to know when something was bigger than I could handle alone. But I was also curious enough, or foolish enough, to want answers. The next morning, I hiked back to headquarters and checked the historical records. Jake Morrison worked as our park historian. He was about my age, had grown up in these mountains. His family went back 5 generations in the Smokies. If anyone would know about old moonshine operations, it would be Jake. Cataract Falls? Jake's face went pale when I described the location. You sure that's where you found the still? Positive. Why? Jake pulled out an old file box. Because that's where the Morrison family operation got raided in 1925. My great-grandfather's still. He spread out newspaper clippings and federal reports on his desk. The headlines told the story. Federal raid ends in gunfight. 3 bootleggers killed. Moonshine operation destroyed. Samuel Morrison, Thomas Hightower, and Jim Caldwell. Jake read from the report. All killed resisting federal officers. The still was destroyed. But the agents never found the main supply. Over 200 gallons of finished product that disappeared the night before the raid. I told Jake about the 3 men I'd seen working the still. About their conversation. About the fresh moonshine that appeared overnight. Jake stared at the old photos. You described my great-grandfather perfectly. Right down to his voice. I heard recordings of him when I was a kid. That's impossible. These men died 42 years ago. Look at this. Jake pulled out a hand-drawn map from 1925. The still location matches exactly. And this note in the margin, last run must be completed. Product hidden in cave system below falls. We decided to go back together. Jake wanted to see the place where his family's operation had been destroyed. I wanted answers to questions that didn't make sense. The hike took us 3 hours. Jake knew shortcuts I'd never seen, old family paths through the mountains. As we got closer to Cataract Falls, he got quieter. My great-grandmother always said Grandpa Samuel never got to rest, Jake told me. Said he died with unfinished business. The still was operating again when we arrived. Fresh smoke rose from the fire underneath the copper pot. The smell of corn mash was stronger now, almost overwhelming. And we could hear voices. The same 3 men I'd seen the night before. But this time, they were clearer. More solid. Jake gasped when he saw them. That's him. That's Samuel Morrison. The 3 moonshiners looked up at us. For a moment, no one moved. Then Samuel spoke. Your kin. His voice carried across the clearing like a whisper. You have the Morrison look. Jake stepped forward. I'm your great-grandson. Jake Morrison. The ghost? Because that's what he was, no point pretending otherwise, smiled sadly. Then you understand why we can't rest. The last run was never finished. The federal boys came too early. Thomas Hightower pointed toward the cave system below the falls. 200 gallons, sealed and aging. Finest corn liquor ever made in these mountains. We promised deliveries, families depending on that money. But you're dead, I said. The raid was 42 years ago. Time don't matter when you got promises to keep, Jim Caldwell replied. Every night we come back. Every night we try to finish the run. But we can't move the product. Can't make the deliveries. Can't rest until the job's done. That's when Jake made his mistake. I could help you. I could finish what you started. The 3 spirits turned toward him with expressions of desperate hope. You'd do that? You'd help us complete the last run? Jake, no. I grabbed his arm. These aren't your family. There's something else now. But Jake was already walking toward the still. The spirits gathered around him, and I could see them getting more solid, more real, as he got closer. The product's hidden in the cave, Samuel explained. We tried to move it the night before the raid, but the federal agents came too fast. Been trying to complete the delivery ever since. Jake knelt by the still, touching the warm copper. Where were you supposed to deliver it? Asheville. Got buyers waiting. Families counting on the money. Jake, this is crazy, I called out. Asheville's changed a lot in 40 years. Those buyers are long dead. But Jake wasn't listening anymore. The spirits had him now, filling his head with their unfinished business. I could see it in his eyes. The same desperate need to complete the run that had trapped these men for 42 years. That's when I heard the other sound. Car engines. Old car engines, coming up the mountain on roads that hadn't existed for decades. Federal agents, Thomas whispered, his form starting to flicker with fear. They found us again. The sound got closer. Model T engines, unmistakable. And voices, men shouting orders, the jingle of handcuffs and weapons. The raid was starting again, just like it had in 1925. Every night, Samuel said, his voice fading as fear took hold. Every night, they come. Every night, We die, but we never finish the run. Jake was standing now, a mason jar of moonshine in his hands. I can break the cycle. I can make the delivery. Jake, don't drink that. But he was already raising the jar to his lips. The moonshine hit Jake like liquid fire. I watched his expression change from curiosity to shock to something that wasn't quite human anymore. He staggered, then straightened, and when he looked at me, his eyes had the same desperate gleam I'd seen in the spirits. I understand now, he said, his voice carrying the weight of 42 years. I have to help them finish the run. The sound of engines grew louder. Through the trees, I could see lights moving, not modern flashlights, but the yellowish glow of 1,925 headlamps. The federal agents were coming, just like they had decades ago. Robert, you have to help me load the product. Jake was already heading toward the cave system below the falls. We can beat them this time. We can make the delivery. The three spirits followed him, their forms growing more solid as the moment of the original raid approached. They moved with purpose now. No longer the fading wisps I'd first seen. Samuel Morrison looked almost alive again. Down here, boy, Samuel called to Jake. Mind the loose rocks. I followed them into the caves, my flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed older than it should be. The cave system was larger than I'd expected, carved out by centuries of water flow. And everywhere I looked, I saw signs of the old operation. Cases of mason jars lined the walls, wooden crates marked with delivery addresses in Asheville, Knoxville, even as far away as Atlanta. The smell of aged corn liquor was overwhelming. This hadn't been just a small family operation, this was serious business. 200 gallons, Thomas confirmed, gesturing to the stored product. Finest liquor in the mountains, buyers paid in advance. Families counting on this money to last through the winter. Jake was already loading jars into crates. The spirits guided him, showing him how they'd planned to pack everything for transport. But as he worked, I noticed something wrong. The jars Jake touched turned ice cold. Frost formed on the glass, and Jake himself was getting paler, more translucent. Jake, stop, you're becoming like them. He ignored me, working faster as the sound of engines got closer. Almost ready, just need to get these to the delivery point. That's when the first gunshot echoed through the cave. The federal agents had found the still. Just like they had in 1925, they'd come armed and ready for a fight. I could hear shouting outside, orders being given, positions taken. Samuel Morrison, come out with your hands up. The voice carried the authority of 1,925 federal law enforcement. These weren't modern agents. These were the same men who'd killed the moonshiners 42 years ago, trapped in the same loop, forced to replay the raid every night. Samuel, Thomas, and Jim looked at each other with grim understanding. Time to go, Samuel said. Just like always, they headed for the cave entrance, moving toward a gunfight they'd already lost dozens of times. But this time was different. This time, they had Jake. You stay here, Samuel told him. Finish loading the product. When the shooting stops, make the run to Asheville. What about you? We'll hold them off as long as we can, just like last time. I grabbed Jake's arm as the spirits headed outside. His skin was cold as ice. This isn't real. They're dead. You're being used. It's real enough, Jake replied, shrugging me off. And these people deserve justice. 42 years they've been trying to complete this run. 42 years of being killed every night by federal agents who don't even belong here anymore. The gunfight erupted outside. I could hear the crack of rifles, the return fire of shotguns and pistols, men shouting, cursing, dying. The same violence that had ended the Morrison operation in 1925, replaying itself in 1967. Jake kept loading moonshine, moving with inhuman speed now. The jars felt like blocks of ice when I tried to stop him, and every jar he touched pulled more life out of him, making him more like the spirits he was trying to help. Jake, listen to me. My grandfather was one of those federal agents. He told me about this raid. The moonshiners weren't innocent victims. They shot first. They killed a federal marshal. This wasn't some government persecution. This was justice. Jake paused, a crate of moonshine in his hands. For a moment, I thought I'd reached him. Then Samuel's voice echoed from the cave entrance. Don't listen to him, boy. His granddaddy was the one who murdered us. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My grandfather, Agent William Stillwater, had led the 1,925 raid. I'd grown up hearing his stories about brave federal agents facing down dangerous criminals, but I'd never heard the names of the men they'd killed. Jake's eyes blazed with supernatural anger. Your family destroyed mine, killed my great-grandfather for making honest liquor to feed his children. They resisted arrest. They shot first, because they knew the federal boys would kill them anyway. The gunfight outside was reaching its climax. I could hear men screaming, dying, just like they had 42 years ago. And Jake was almost finished loading the moonshine, ready to complete the run that would trap his soul forever. That's when I understood what was really happening. This wasn't about finishing a delivery. This was about revenge. The spirits weren't trying to complete their business. They were trying to recruit new souls to their cause. Every night, they replayed the raid. Every night, they died again. But if they could get someone else to finish the run, to drink their moonshine and take on their curse, maybe they could finally rest. Or maybe they just wanted company in their eternal torment. I drew my service weapon. Step away from the moonshine, Jake. He turned to face me, no longer fully human. Ice crystals had formed in his hair and on his clothes. His breath came out as white vapor despite the spring warmth. You going to shoot me, Robert? Just like your granddaddy shot mine? I'm trying to save you. Too late for that. Jake lifted the last crate and headed for the cave entrance. Outside, the gunfight was ending. I could hear the dying groans of the three spirits, just like always. In a few minutes, they'd start the whole cycle again. Unless Jake completed their run, I had one chance to break the cycle. One chance to save my friend and put these spirits to rest. But it meant confronting the truth about my own family's role in this 42-year-old tragedy. I followed Jake out of the cave into a scene from 1925. The clearing was lit by muzzle flashes and old-style lanterns. Federal agents in period uniforms crouched behind trees, firing at the moonshiners who defended their still. The smell of gunpowder mixed with corn mash and wood smoke. And there, leading the federal agents, was my grandfather. Agent William Stillwater looked exactly like he had in old family photos. Young, determined, righteous. He moved through the gunfight with the confidence of a man who believed he was enforcing justice. But when he looked at me, I saw something else in his eyes. Recognition and regret. Robert. His voice carried the weight of 42 years. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you, Grandpa. You died 5 years ago. Some deaths follow you into the grave, boy. Some mistakes echo through generations. The gunfight raged around us, but Jake was moving through it like a ghost himself, carrying his crate of moonshine toward what had once been a road to Asheville. The spirits of Samuel Morrison, Thomas Hightower, and Jim Caldwell lay bleeding around their still, but their eyes followed Jake's progress. Stop him, Samuel gasped. Don't let them win again. He's one of them, Thomas whispered, pointing at me. Stillwater blood, federal blood. My grandfather raised his rifle, aiming at Jake, just like he'd aimed at the moonshiners in 1925. He's carrying contraband. I have to stop him. Grandpa, no, this isn't 1925. Prohibition ended 34 years ago. You're fighting a war that's already over. But Agent William Stillwater was trapped in his own loop, forced to replay the raid that had defined his career. The raid that had made him a hero in federal law enforcement. The raid that had also made him a killer. I stepped between my grandfather and Jake. You want to shoot someone? Shoot me. The federal agent hesitated. Around us, the gunfight continued. Agents and moonshiners locked in eternal combat. But for a moment, time seemed suspended. I did what I had to do, my grandfather said. They were criminals. They were fathers trying to feed their families during the worst economic times in our country's history, and you killed them for it. They shot first, because they knew you'd never let them surrender alive. Jake had reached the edge of the clearing. A few more steps and he'd be on the ghost road to Asheville, carrying moonshine that would complete the run and trap his soul forever. I had to make a choice, stop my friend or confront my family's legacy. I turned my back on my grandfather and ran after Jake. Jake, wait, I know how to break this. He paused at the edge of the ghost road. Behind us, the gunfight was ending. The federal agents were winning, just like they always did. The three moonshiners were dying, just like they always did. It's about justice, I said, catching up to him. Not the law. Justice. Your grandfather killed my family. Yes. And that was wrong. But finishing this run won't bring them back. It'll just trap you with them. Jake's eyes were completely white now, frosted over with supernatural cold. The crate of moonshine in his hands was so cold it was burning his skin, but he couldn't let go. They deserved to rest. Then give them what they really need. Not revenge, not a completed delivery, justice. Acknowledgement of what was done to them. I turned back to the clearing where my grandfather stood over the dying spirits. Agent Stillwater, William Stillwater. The federal agent looked at me with confusion. How do you know my name? Because I'm your grandson, and I'm here to tell you something you need to hear. The gunfight had stopped. Federal agents and moonshiners alike watched us in the sudden silence. You were wrong, I said to my grandfather. These men weren't dangerous criminals. They were desperate fathers, trying to survive the Depression. You came here with enough firepower to fight an army, and you used it against 3 men defending their livelihood. I followed orders. I enforced the law. You enforced a bad law. Prohibition was wrong. It turned honest people into criminals and criminals into killers. And you never questioned it. You never asked if what you were doing was right. The spirit of William Stillwater stared at me for a long moment. Around us, the other federal agents began to flicker and fade. The loop was breaking. I was proud of this raid. It made my career, and it destroyed theirs. Samuel Morrison had 6 children. Thomas Hightower was supporting his invalid mother. Jim Caldwell was saving money to buy his own farm. Behind me, Jake was setting down the crate of moonshine. The ice crystals in his hair were melting. Color was returning to his skin. They weren't monsters, I continued. They were just men trying to survive in impossible times, and they deserved better than being gunned down in their own mountains. The spirits of the 3 moonshiners were standing now, their wounds healing, their forms growing brighter. Samuel Morrison looked at my grandfather with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't hatred either. We just wanted to finish the run, Samuel said quietly. Wanted to keep our promises. My grandfather lowered his rifle. I'm sorry. I thought I was doing right. Maybe you were, Thomas Hightower replied. In 1925, with the laws you had to follow. But times change, laws change, and some fights ain't worth winning. The 3 spirits turned to Jake, who was now fully human again, standing beside the abandoned crate of moonshine. You don't need to finish our run, boy, Samuel said. We just needed someone to understand why we fought, why we couldn't surrender, why we died. Jim Caldwell nodded toward the ghost road to Asheville. Those buyers have been dead for decades anyway, and their families found other ways to survive. The federal agents were fading away now, their part in the loop finally complete. My grandfather looked at me one last time. Take better care of these mountains than we did, Robert. And remember, sometimes the law and justice ain't the same thing. Then he was gone, along with all the other agents. The 3 moonshiners stood together by their still, solid, and real, in the morning light. Time to rest now, Samuel said. Time to let the dead stay dead. They began to fade too, but slowly, peacefully. Not the violent dissolution of a broken loop, but the gentle departure of souls finally at peace. Thank you, Thomas whispered as he disappeared. For understanding, Jim added. For caring about the truth, Samuel finished. Then they were gone, and Jake and I stood alone in the clearing with an old moonshine still and 200 gallons of the finest corn liquor ever made in the Smoky Mountains. We destroyed the still that morning. Jake insisted on it, saying his great-grandfather would have wanted the operation properly shut down. We poured out every jar of moonshine, 42 years of aging, going back to the mountain soil where it belonged. The cave system went into the records as an important historical site. Officially, we discovered evidence of a significant Prohibition-era operation. The area was restricted for archaeological sensitivity. Nobody needed to know about the supernatural enforcement we'd witnessed. Jake went back to his historian job, but something had changed in him. He started researching family stories more carefully, looking for the truth behind the legends. He found out Samuel Morrison had indeed supported 6 children, and that the family had nearly starved the winter after his death. I kept working as a park ranger, but my perspective had shifted. I started seeing the mountains differently. These weren't just beautiful wilderness areas to be protected. They were places where people had lived, worked, struggled, and died. Their stories mattered, even when they conflicted with official histories. especially when they conflicted with official histories. About a month after the incident at Cataract Falls, I got a report of strange lights near Rough Ridge, about 12 miles north. Hikers complained about the smell of sour mash and the sound of glass breaking in the middle of the night. I found the remnants of another still site, this one from the 1920 seconds, and fresh evidence that someone or something had been trying to operate it recently. Mason jars filled with moonshine, equipment that ran without operators and carved into a nearby tree. The 3rd of June 1923, they came with badges and guns. I filed the report and requested the area be restricted. But I didn't investigate further. Some ghosts are best left alone until they're ready to tell their stories. Jake helped me research the site. We found records of another federal raid, another family of moonshiners killed resisting arrest, another incomplete run, another promise that couldn't be kept. The pattern was clear now. Throughout these mountains, Prohibition-era spirits were trapped in endless loops, trying to finish interrupted business. Some were moonshiners who died defending their stills. Some were federal agents who'd questioned their orders too late. All of them were stuck in a war that had ended decades ago, fighting for laws that no longer existed. "How many more do you think there are?" Jake asked one evening as we reviewed historical raid records. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. Every family that made liquor, every agent who enforced prohibition, they're all connected by the same injustice. What do we do about them?" I thought about my grandfather's final words, about the difference between law and justice, about the responsibility we have to understand the past, not just enforce the present. We listen to their stories, we remember what really happened, and we help them find peace when we can. But I also knew some spirits weren't ready for peace. Some had been angry too long, hurt too deeply. Some would keep fighting their war until they found someone willing to take their side completely. That's why I keep detailed records now. Every strange report, every unexplained phenomenon, every case where the evidence doesn't match the explanation. Because someday, another ranger is going to find themselves face to face with ghosts from America's past. And they're going to need to understand that sometimes the dead have good reasons for refusing to stay buried. My name is Robert Stillwater, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years. I've learned that some crimes never close, some wars never end, and some promises echo through generations. But I've also learned that understanding the past is the first step toward healing it, even when that past includes your own family's mistakes. The mountains remember everything, every injustice, every tragedy, every family destroyed by laws that seemed right at the time but history proved wrong. And sometimes, late at night when the mist rolls through the hollers, those memories take shape and walk among us, looking for someone who cares enough to listen to their stories, someone who understands the difference between the law and justice, someone willing to help them finish what they started or find peace in letting go. I carry that responsibility now, and someday I'll pass it on to someone else, because these mountains will outlast all of us, and their ghosts will keep trying to tell their stories long after we're gone. The trick is knowing which ones to help and which ones to walk away from, because some spirits want justice, and some just want company in their eternal anger. Learning the difference might be the most important skill a ranger can have. My name is Eleanor Greystone, and I've been a park ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 19 years. I know every trail, every stream, and every animal that calls this place home. At least, I thought I did. People always ask me how I can live alone out here in the cranberry wilderness. The truth is, I'm not really alone. I have the bears to keep me company. Black bears are my specialty. I have a PhD in zoology, and I've spent most of my adult life studying how they behave. These mountains are full of them, and after all these years, I can tell you that bears are smart, careful animals. They avoid people. They follow patterns. They make sense. That's why what happened in August of 1981 still keeps me awake at night. It was the hottest summer anyone could remember. The air was so thick and heavy that even the birds seemed too tired to fly. Every morning, fog would roll up from the valleys like smoke, making everything look gray and strange. I'd been living in my research cabin near the cranberry glades for 3 months that summer, tracking a family of bears that had been acting different than usual. The bog area around here is special. It sits up high in the mountains, at about 3,400 feet, and it's full of weird plants that eat bugs and water that's more acid than coffee. Most people think bogs are creepy. And maybe they're right. The trees grow all twisted and small, and the ground feels spongy under your feet. Sometimes you can hear bubbling sounds coming from under the moss, like the earth is trying to say something. The old-timers in town used to tell stories about this place. They said the Seneca Indians warned people to stay away, that the bog was cursed ground. There was also talk about a logging camp from the 1922nd, where something terrible happened. Men went crazy and killed each other for no reason. But I'm a scientist. I don't believe in curses or ghosts. I believe in facts and evidence. My life had been pretty quiet since my husband died 3 years ago in a car accident. The work was enough for me. The bears were enough. Every day, I'd check my cameras, write notes about what I saw, and radio and reports to my supervisor back in town. Simple, peaceful, normal. Then Dr. Martinez and his team came up to study the bog plants. There were 4 of them, botanists from the university who wanted to catalog the rare flowers that grow here. They seemed like nice people, excited about their research. Dr. Martinez was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and thick glasses. The others were younger, 2 men and a woman, all grad students. They set up their camp about 2 miles from my cabin, near the heart of the bog. I helped them get settled and warned them about the bears, told them to keep their food locked up tight. Dr. Martinez laughed and said they weren't worried about bears. They were more concerned about stepping in the wrong spot and sinking into the bog water. That was Tuesday. By Friday, they were supposed to radio me to check in. Friday came and went. No call. Saturday morning, I tried reaching them on my radio. Nothing but static. I wasn't too worried yet. Radio signals get weird up here sometimes, especially when the fog is thick. But Saturday afternoon, I decided to hike over and check on them. What I found made my blood turn cold. Their campsite looked like a tornado had hit it. Tents were shredded, gear was scattered everywhere, and there was this smell, sweet and sick, like rotting meat mixed with swamp gas. But there were no bodies, no blood, just destruction. I called for them, shouting their names until my voice echoed off the mountains. Nothing called back except the wind. That's when I noticed the tracks. I've been studying animal tracks since I was a kid, and I can tell you the story of any creature just by looking at the marks it leaves behind. But these tracks, these didn't make sense. There were bear prints, yes, big ones from a male, probably 400 pounds or more. But mixed in with the bear tracks were wolf prints, and we don't have wolves in these mountains anymore. There were also prints from what looked like a big cat, maybe a mountain lion, and deer tracks, and prints from smaller animals like raccoons and possums. Here's the strange part. They were all walking together, all heading in the same direction, like they were in some kind of parade. In 19 years of tracking animals, I had never seen anything like it. Bears don't walk with wolves. Deer don't travel with mountain lions. Predators and prey don't hold hands and skip through the forest together. But the evidence was right there in front of me, pressed into the soft mud around the destroyed camp. I followed the tracks for about 50 yards before they disappeared into a thick patch of fog near the bog's edge. The fog was so dense I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, and something about it felt wrong. It wasn't moving the way fog should move. It seemed to be staying in one spot on purpose, like it was hiding something. That's when I heard the sound. It was like singing, but not quite. More like humming, or maybe whispering. It was coming from inside the fog, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I couldn't tell if it was human or animal or something else entirely. I stood there listening for maybe 10 minutes, trying to work up the courage to walk into that fog and see what was making the sound. But something deep in my brain, some old instinct that kept our ancestors alive, was screaming at me to run. So I did. I ran back to my cabin as fast as I could, locked the door, and grabbed my radio to call for help. The rescue team arrived Sunday morning, 3 Park Service guys and a sheriff's deputy. They were good men, experienced in the mountains. But they looked at me like I was losing my mind when I told them about the tracks. "Animals don't travel together like that, Eleanor," said Jim Hawkins, the deputy. He'd known me for years, had even helped my husband fix our car once. "You sure you saw what you think you saw?" We hiked back to the botanist's camp together. The destruction was still there, but the tracks were gone. The rain Saturday night had washed them all away, leaving just smooth mud and my word that they'd ever existed. The men searched the area for hours, calling the missing researchers' names and checking every hiding spot they could think of. But the fog stayed thick around the bog's center, and none of them wanted to go into it, not after I described that humming sound. Probably just wind through the trees, Jim said, but his voice didn't sound convincing. They found Dr. Martinez's notebook under a torn piece of tent. The last entry was Friday morning, and it was strange. Water in bog turning darker, plants growing faster than normal, team members reporting bad dreams. Maya says she heard voices calling her name last night, planning to investigate source of disturbance at center of bog after lunch. That was it, nothing else. The rescue team decided the botanists had probably gotten lost in the fog and would turn up eventually. People get confused in thick fog all the time. They left Sunday evening, promising to send a helicopter if the missing researchers didn't show up by Tuesday. I stayed behind. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. Like when you're walking through the woods and suddenly realize everything has gone quiet. No birds, no insects, no sound at all. That kind of wrong. Monday morning, I was checking my bear cameras when I found Maya. Maya Patel was one of Dr. Martinez's grad students, a small woman with dark hair who'd been excited about studying the bog's carnivorous plants. I found her sitting by the edge of the water, perfectly still, staring at nothing. "Maya," I called, running toward her. "Thank God, everyone's been looking for you. Where are the others?" But when I got close enough to touch her shoulder, I saw her eyes. They were completely empty. Not dead, she was breathing fine, her heart was beating, but there was nobody home behind those eyes. It was like someone had taken Maya's soul and left just her body sitting there. "Maya, can you hear me?" I shook her gently. Her head turned toward me, but her eyes stayed blank. When she opened her mouth, no words came out, just that humming sound I'd heard in the fog. I tried everything I could think of. I gave her water, talked to her about her research, even slapped her face lightly. Nothing worked. She just sat there, humming that weird tune and staring at the bog water. While I was trying to help Maya, I heard something moving in the trees behind me. I turned around and nearly jumped out of my skin. A deer was watching me. A big buck with a massive set of antlers. But this wasn't like any deer I'd ever seen. This one wasn't afraid. It was standing about 20 feet away, perfectly still, just staring at me with these bright, intelligent eyes. And those eyes were glowing red. Not reflecting light the way animal eyes do at night, actually glowing, like someone had put little red bulbs inside the deer's head. "What the hell?" I whispered. The buck tilted its head, studying me the way a person might study an interesting bug. Then it made a sound, not a normal deer noise, but something that sounded almost like laughing. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. More eyes were glowing in the forest around me, dozens of them. Bears, wolves, smaller creatures I couldn't identify, all watching me with those same bright red eyes, all perfectly still and quiet. And they were all between me and the path back to my cabin. I looked down at Maya, still humming and staring at the water. The tune she was humming sounded familiar now. It was the same melody I'd heard coming from the fog Saturday afternoon. "We need to get out of here," I told her, trying to pull her to her feet. But Maya wouldn't budge. She was surprisingly strong, like her body had turned into a statue. The animals started moving closer, not in a hurry, just slowly and deliberately, like they had all the time in the world. The buck was in the lead, and I swear it was smiling. I had my tranquilizer gun with me. I always carried it when I was working with bears. But looking at all those glowing eyes, I knew one dart wasn't going to be enough. And something told me these animals weren't going to react to tranquilizers the way normal animals would. "Stay back," I shouted, raising the gun. "I'm warning you." The buck stopped walking and tilted its head again. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. "Eleanor," it said in a voice like rustling leaves, "we've been waiting for you. I've heard a lot of strange things in these mountains over the years. Wind that sounds like voices, trees creaking in ways that make your skin crawl, night sounds that don't quite match any animal you know. But I had never, ever heard an animal talk. This isn't real," I said, mostly to myself. "This is not happening." But Maya stopped humming and turned to look at me. When she opened her mouth, the same leaf-rustling voice came out. "Come into the water, Eleanor. Come and see what we've learned." The other animals started making sounds too, Not their normal calls, but words. Dozens of voices, all saying the same thing. Come into the water. Come and see. I fired a tranquilizer dart at the buck. It hit him right in the chest, but he didn't even flinch. He just looked down at the dart, then back at me, and kept walking forward. That's when I broke and ran. I left Maya sitting by the water and bolted toward the trees, hoping to circle around the animals and get back to my cabin. But everywhere I turned, more red eyes were waiting for me. They herded me like sheep, pushing me away from the path home and toward the heart of the bog. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber. When I finally stopped, I was standing at the edge of a part of the bog I'd never seen before. A perfectly round pool of black water surrounded by dead trees. The water was moving, bubbling and swirling like it was alive. And floating in the center of the pool were Dr. Martinez and his other 2 students. They were floating face up, perfectly still, their eyes wide open and glowing the same red as the animals' eyes. They weren't dead, I could see them breathing, but they looked just like Maya had, empty, gone. Beautiful, isn't it? Said a voice behind me. I spun around to find the buck standing there, along with what looked like half the animals in the forest. All of them had those glowing red eyes, and all of them were watching me with expressions that looked way too human. What did you do to them? I demanded. We didn't do anything, the buck replied. They came to us, just like you will. The water in the pool started bubbling harder, and something began rising from the bottom, something dark and shapeless, like living shadow. As it rose, the eyes of every animal around me glowed brighter. We've been sleeping in this water for so long, the buck said. Longer than your people have walked these mountains, but now we're awake, and we need bodies to live in. Animal bodies are good, but human bodies are better. I understood then what I was looking at. This wasn't about rabies or territory disputes or any scientific explanation. This was something much older and much worse. The shadow in the water reached the surface and began to spread out like oil. Where it touched the edges of the pool, the plants withered and died instantly. Don't fight it, Eleanor, said Maya's voice, though Maya was nowhere to be seen. It doesn't hurt. You just go to sleep. And then we wake up in your place. The animals started closing in around me, moving in perfect coordination like they were all controlled by the same mind, which, I realized, they probably were. I had 2 choices. Let them take me to the water or find another way out. I chose option 3. I pulled out my emergency flare and fired it straight into the pool. The flare hit the black water with a sound like screaming metal. Bright red light exploded across the surface of the pool, and whatever was rising from the bottom let out a shriek that made my teeth ache. Every animal around me staggered backward as if they'd been slapped. Their red eyes flickered like bad light bulbs, and for just a moment, I saw confusion on their faces instead of that eerie intelligence. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I ran again, crashing through the undergrowth toward where I thought my cabin might be. Behind me, I could hear the animals recovering, snarls and howls and that terrible humming sound getting louder and angrier. The forest had changed while I was at the pool. Trees that had been healthy that morning were now twisted and black, their branches reaching out like claws. The ground felt soft and wet under my feet, even though it hadn't rained since Saturday. And everywhere I looked, I saw more of those glowing red eyes watching me from the shadows. I made it about half a mile before they caught up. A wolf stepped out of the trees ahead of me, the biggest wolf I'd ever seen, easily 200 pounds of muscle and teeth. Its red eyes locked onto mine, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like my dead husband's. Ellie, it said, using the nickname only he had called me. Why are you running from me? I nearly dropped to my knees. Hearing Tom's voice coming from that monster's mouth was like being punched in the heart. You're not him, I whispered. Tom's dead. Death is just sleeping, the wolf replied. We can bring him back. We can bring all of them back. Dr. Martinez, his students, your husband, anyone you want. All you have to do is join us in the water. More animals emerged from the forest around me. Bears, deer, wildcats, even birds perched in the dead branches above. All with those same glowing eyes, all speaking in voices I recognized. Neighbors, friends, family members who had died over the years. This is what the water showed us, said a black bear in my mother's gentle voice. All the people you've lost, Eleanor. We can bring them back. It's not real, I said, but my voice was shaking. God help me, I wanted it to be real. I wanted to see Tom again so badly it hurt. "Feel that?" asked a raccoon in my father's gruff tone. The creature gestured with its tiny paws toward my chest, where my heart was pounding. "That's hope, sweetheart. Hope that you thought was gone forever." I felt tears running down my face. This was my worst nightmare and my greatest dream all mixed together. Every person I'd ever missed, standing right there in front of me, asking me to come home with them. But they weren't people. They were things wearing the voices of people I'd loved. "What happened to Dr. Martinez and his team?" I asked, trying to stay focused on reality. "Are they really still alive?" "Their bodies are alive," said the wolf Tom. "Their minds are sleeping peacefully while we use what we need. They're not suffering, Ellie. They're dreaming beautiful dreams. And when you're done using their bodies..." The animals went quiet for a moment. Then the bear mother spoke. "We never get done, dear. We live forever." That's when I understood the full horror of what I was dealing with. These things, whatever they were, didn't just kill people. They trapped them inside their own bodies forever, conscious but helpless, while something else wore them like a suit of clothes. I thought about Maya sitting by the water, humming that awful tune. Was she still in there somewhere, screaming silently while this thing used her voice? "No," I said, backing away from the circle of possessed animals. "I won't let you do that to me." "You don't have a choice," said the wolf. "You're surrounded, and you're just one person with a tranquilizer gun that doesn't work on us. Come quietly, and we'll make the transition gentle." I looked around at all the red eyes staring at me and realized they were right. There were too many of them, and nowhere left to run. That's when I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was little. My grandmother was Cherokee, not Seneca like the tribes that used to live here, but she knew the old stories about cursed places. She used to say that spirits who possessed living things had one weakness: they couldn't cross running water while they were inside a host. I was maybe 200 yards from Cranberry Creek. "Last chance, Eleanor," said the bear. "Come with us now, or we'll drag you." Instead of answering, I pulled out my backup flare and fired it at the nearest tree. The dead branches caught fire immediately, creating a wall of flame between me and half the animals. While they were distracted by the fire, I ran toward the creek. I could hear them chasing me, dozens of feet pounding the ground, branches breaking, that terrible humming sound getting closer and closer. Something hot and sharp raked across my back, claws from one of the cats, but I kept running. The creek was just ahead, a narrow ribbon of water maybe 4 feet wide. I could hear it babbling over the rocks, the most beautiful sound in the world. I leaped across the creek and landed hard on the far side, scraping my hands on the rocky bank. When I turned around, I saw every single possessed animal standing at the water's edge, their red eyes blazing with fury. But none of them followed me across. "This won't protect you forever," snarled the wolf Tom. "We'll find another way. The water calls to all living things eventually," added the bear mother. "You'll get thirsty, you'll get tired, and when you do, you'll come back to us." They were right, of course. I couldn't stay on this side of the creek forever. I had no food, no shelter, and no way to call for help. My radio was back at the cabin, along with all my supplies. But at least I was alive and still myself for now. I watched the possessed animals pace back and forth along the far bank like caged tigers. After about an hour, they started drifting back into the forest, but I could still see red eyes glowing in the shadows. They were waiting. That's when I noticed the fog. It was starting to roll in from the bog area, thick and gray, and moving in a way that fog definitely shouldn't move. It crept along the ground like it was alive, flowing around trees and rocks and heading straight for the creek. When the fog reached the water, it didn't stop. It poured across the creek like a waterfall, and as it passed over me, I felt a cold that went deeper than my bones. Inside the fog, I could hear voices whispering. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all speaking at once in languages I didn't recognize. And underneath all the voices was that humming sound, louder and more complex than before. The fog thickened until I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. That's when I heard footsteps in the water. Someone was crossing the creek. I couldn't see who it was through the fog, but I could hear them walking slowly and deliberately toward where I was sitting. Their feet made soft, splashing sounds with each step. "Eleanor," called a familiar voice through the mist. "It's Maya. I'm myself again." The running water broke me free from their control. I wanted to believe her so badly. Maya had seemed like a nice person during the brief time I'd known her, but I remembered her empty eyes and that humming sound coming from her mouth. "Prove it," I called back. "Tell me something only the real Maya would know." "We talked about carnivorous plants on Tuesday," Maya's voice replied. "I told you about my research on sundews and how they catch flies with sticky traps. You said your husband used to call Venus flytraps vegetarian piranhas because they snapped shut so fast. That was all true. But something about the voice still didn't sound right. "Come closer," I said. "I want to see your eyes." Maya's silhouette appeared in the fog, walking slowly toward me. As she got nearer, I could see her face more clearly. Her eyes weren't glowing red anymore. They were brown and normal and full of terror. "Oh God, Eleanor," she whispered, falling to her knees beside me. "The things I saw while I was trapped in my own head, the things they made me do with my body." She started crying, and it sounded so genuine that I almost reached out to comfort her. But then I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. Maya wasn't wet. She just walked across a 4-foot-wide creek, but her clothes and hair were completely dry. I rolled away from Maya just as her face twisted into something inhuman. Her brown eyes flashed red, and when she opened her mouth to speak, dozens of voices came out at once. "Clever girl," the Maya thing hissed, "but not clever enough." The fog around us started to swirl faster, and I could see more figures moving through it. Dr. Martinez stepped out of the mist, his glasses cracked and his clothes torn. Behind him came the 2 other grad students, walking in perfect synchronization. None of them were wet either. "The spirits don't need bodies to cross running water, Doctor," Martinez said in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. "They just need us to invite them across. And you've been so helpful, Eleanor." I realized with growing horror that I'd been tricked. By talking to the fake Maya, by believing she was real even for a moment, I'd somehow given these things permission to cross the creek. "What do you want?" I asked, backing away from them. "We want what we've always wanted," said one of the grad students. "To live, to feel sunlight and rain and wind, to walk in the world above instead of sleeping in dark water. We've been trapped in that bog for centuries," added the other student, "bound there by rituals and warnings and the fear of your people. But fear fades, memory dies, and eventually, someone always comes close enough for us to reach." The Maya thing smiled with too many teeth. Dr. Martinez and his team made it easy. They came right to the heart of our prison, took samples of our water, breathed our mist. We slipped into their dreams first, then into their minds, and finally into their bodies. I thought about the notebook entry, about the team reporting bad dreams and hearing voices. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "Oh, we don't plan, Doctor," Martinez said. "We just wait. And when the right person comes along, someone with knowledge, someone respected, someone who could bring others to this place, we act." That's when I understood the real scope of what was happening. They didn't just want to possess a few researchers and a park ranger. They wanted to use us to bring more people here, to spread out from this bog into the wider world. "You're not just after me," I said. "You want to use me to get to other people." "Eleanor Greystone, respected wildlife expert," the Maya thing said mockingly. "Author of papers, consultant to government agencies, trusted voice in the scientific community. Think how many people would listen to you if you told them about an amazing discovery in the cranberry wilderness. Think how many would come to see for themselves." The fog was getting thicker, and I could barely see beyond the circle of possessed bodies around me. But through the mist, I caught glimpses of more figures approaching. The animals from before, all of them moving with that same eerie coordination. "We've learned so much from the minds we've borrowed, Doctor," Martinez continued. "How your world works now, how people communicate, how to blend in. We won't make the same mistakes our ancestors made." "What mistakes?" I asked, trying to buy time while I figured out some way to escape. "They were too obvious," one of the grad students said. "They possessed entire tribes at once, made everyone in a village act strangely. Your people noticed and fought back. This time, we'll be more careful. A few people here, a few there. Slow and steady, until we control enough minds to make resistance impossible." The fog pressed in closer, and I felt that bone-deep cold again. Through the mist, I could hear other voices joining the conversation. Some human, some animal, all speaking in perfect unison. "We'll be park rangers and scientists and government officials. We'll be trusted voices recommending that people visit this beautiful wilderness area." We'll be tour guides leading groups to the most interesting parts of the bog, and one by one, we'll grow stronger. I was completely surrounded now, with nowhere left to run. The creek that had protected me was useless, with the spirits already on my side of the water. My flares were gone, my tranquilizer gun was worse than useless, and I was outnumbered 100 to 1. But then I remembered something else my grandmother had told me about cursed places. "You made one mistake," I said. The circle of possessed bodies stopped moving. "Doctor." Martinez tilted his head like a curious bird. "What mistake?" "You told me the truth about how long you've been here. Centuries, trapped in that bog, which means you were here when the Seneca lived in these mountains." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my emergency tobacco pouch, something I always carried for tradition, not smoking. My grandmother had taught me that tobacco was sacred to many tribes, including the Cherokee and Seneca. "The Seneca knew how to fight you," I said, opening the pouch. "That's why they warned people to stay away. That's why they called this cursed ground." The possessed bodies stepped back slightly, and I saw something like fear flicker in their stolen eyes. "They bound you in that bog with rituals and ceremonies," I continued, pulling out a handful of tobacco. "And if I'm right about how this works, those same rituals can still hurt you." "Impossible," the Maya thing snarled. "You're not Seneca. You don't know their ways." "No," I said, "but I know tobacco is sacred to all the eastern woodland tribes. And I know that sacred things have power over unclean spirits." I scattered the tobacco on the ground around me and spoke the only traditional prayer I could remember, a Cherokee blessing my grandmother had taught me for protection from evil. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The fog recoiled like it had been burned. The possessed bodies screamed and stumbled backward, their red eyes flickering. The voices in the mist became shrieks of pain and rage. But it wasn't enough. I could see the spirits fighting back, pushing through the barrier of scattered tobacco. Whatever protection it gave me was temporary. "You cannot banish us with a handful of leaves," Dr. Martinez said, though his voice was strained now. "We are too strong, and there are too many of us." He was right. I needed something more powerful than a few pinches of tobacco. I needed a real ceremony, conducted by someone who actually knew what they were doing. But maybe I didn't need to banish them. Maybe I just needed to trap them again. I thought about the bog, about that pool of black water where I'd seen the shadow rising. If the spirits had been bound there before, maybe they could be bound there again. "You want my body so badly?" I said, backing toward the direction of the bog pool. "Come and take it." I turned and ran through the fog, following the sound of bubbling water. Behind me, I could hear every possessed creature in the forest giving chase, their feet pounding the ground like thunder. I reached the edge of the black pool and stopped, turning to face the horde of red eyes emerging from the mist. "Here I am," I called. "Come and get me." The spirits in their stolen bodies approached more carefully now, sensing a trap but unable to resist the lure of a new host so close to their source of power. "You cannot escape us here," Dr. Martinez said as he reached the pool's edge. "This is our place, our heart. Here, we are strongest." "I know," I said, and then I pulled the pin on my last emergency flare and threw it into the black water. The entire pool exploded in light and flame. The flare hit the black water and sank about 3 feet before the chemicals ignited. What happened next was like watching a gas tank explode. The bog was full of methane, natural gas that had been building up for decades in the deep, oxygen-poor water. When the flare set it off, the explosion lifted a geyser of burning liquid 50 feet into the air. Every possessed creature around the pool screamed at once, a sound like breaking glass mixed with wind through a graveyard. The red eyes flickered wildly, then went dark. Bodies collapsed everywhere, Dr. Martinez and his students, Maya, dozens of animals, all of them hitting the ground like puppet strings had been cut. The fog evaporated instantly, burned away by the heat and light. For the first time in days, I could see clearly through the whole bog area. The pool itself was on fire, burning like a torch in the center of the wilderness. Black smoke poured up into the sky, visible for miles in every direction. And floating on the surface of the flaming water, I could see the shadow thing writhing in agony before it dissolved into nothing. I checked on the people first. Dr. Martinez and his students were unconscious but breathing. Their eyes had returned to normal colors, and they seemed to be sleeping peacefully instead of that awful empty staring. Maya was awake and herself again, though confused and terrified. "What happened?" she asked, sitting up slowly. "I remember setting up camp, and then, nothing, like I was dreaming for days." I helped her to her feet and looked around at all the animals scattered across the ground. Most of them were getting up too, shaking their heads like they were waking from a deep sleep. A few looked at me with normal animal caution before disappearing into the forest. The pool burned for 3 more hours before the fire finally died out. When the flames were gone, there was nothing left but a crater filled with clean, clear water. The rescue team found us that evening, following the smoke. They helicoptered out Dr. Martinez and his students, who all recovered completely with no memory of being possessed. The official report said they'd gotten lost in the fog and suffered from exposure and dehydration. I never told anyone the real story. Who would believe it? But I made some changes after that. I studied everything I could find about Seneca spiritual practices and the history of the bog. I learned that there had been incidents here before. The 1,920 logging camp disaster was just the most recent. Every 40 or 50 years, something would happen. People would disappear or act strange, and then the trouble would stop for decades. I think the spirits needed time to rebuild their strength after each attempt to escape their prison. The methane explosion had sent them back where they came from, but I knew it wasn't permanent. I quit my job with the Park Service and became something like a spiritual guardian of the area. Working with Seneca elders who remembered the old stories, I learned to perform the ceremonies that keep the bog sealed. Every month, I hike out there and renew the protective rituals. The government drained the bog officially in 1982, claiming environmental contamination. They built a concrete dam and diverted the water flow, turning the whole area into dry land. But I know that's not enough. As long as people remember this place exists, someone will eventually come looking for it again. That's why I'm telling this story now. Not because I want people to believe in spirits and curses, though I do hope you'll take the old warnings seriously, but because I want them to stay away. There are signs posted now around the old bog area. Danger, unstable ground, toxic soil, no entry, protected wildlife habitat, access forbidden. Most people respect those signs, but every few years, someone doesn't. Hikers, looking for adventure, researchers studying the unique ecosystem, teenagers on dares. And sometimes those people come back changed, with red glints in their eyes and voices that don't quite sound right. When that happens, I know what to do. I've become something my grandmother would have recognized, a keeper of dangerous knowledge, a guardian standing between the world of normal people and the old hungers that sleep in dark places. The spirits in the bog weren't destroyed by fire and concrete. They were just forced to wait longer, to be more careful, to find new ways of calling people to them. And they're still calling. Last month, a travel blogger wrote an article about hidden gems of West Virginia wilderness that mentioned the mysterious drained bog with unique geological features near Cranberry Glades. 3 people have already contacted the Park Service asking for directions. I'll be watching for them. I always am. Because some places are meant to stay empty, and some hungers are meant to stay unfed. And the mountain's madness never really dies. It just waits for the next chance to spread.